Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Pittsburgh Current Super Tuesday Live with editor and publisher of the Pittsburgh Current, Charlie Deitch, and political pundit analyst supreme, Erin McClelland. Welcome back, Erin.
Well, we're off to a great start.
You know what? I've decided that I'm going to start writing these intros down.
I love it. No, that was good. I liked it.
I know, but maybe I should be a little more prepared with those. I did write it down. I didn't read it. So, but tonight we've got Democratic candidates. They're vying for delegates in 16 states and territories. There are 1,600 delegates. We've been sitting here for 2 hours. And I've just been sitting here getting ready for this, and right out of the gate, I can't say there are 1,600 delegates up for grabs tonight on Super Tuesday. 16 states along with 14 states along with American Samoa, which this just in, Mike Bloomberg has won his first state territory, whatever you want to call it, of American Samoa. Erin, I know you've been tracking the results in American Samoa.
The rural voters out there, that's what it's all about for me.
Yeah, are the rural voters in American Samoa, are they more Trump focused, I wonder?
Well, we'll find out, won't we?
As the night goes on. But we've got a lot planned for you tonight. We are going to follow the results as they come in. We've got a number of guests. We've got some interviews. We're taking a look at Erin actually sat down earlier this week with candidates for the 18th district, yeah. 18th congressional district, incumbent Mike Doyle and his challenger Jerry Dickinson. Erin got to sit down with both of those guys this week, so we'll be talking about that. I sat down earlier this week to talk about the presidential election with Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto, and we've got lots of other surprises. We've got some folks calling in. We've got a lot of stuff planned for you tonight. Erin, what are you looking for tonight in terms of expectations?
Well, I mean, we have, basically 4 candidates still running.
Yeah.
You have obviously a huge swing of the establishment, all, pulling out every stop, and a very well-executed strategy for Joe Biden to put that to bed, led by James Clyburn, who did a stunning job leading his home state, sealing the deal there, and allowing the establishment to get behind Biden, who got some momentum. I think the question's going to be is what is the Bloomberg effect?
Right.
We talked a lot about what it looked like in 2016 and looked at a map of what that was like, where Hillary won all of the southern states. Bernie did much better in the Rust Belt, which really matters. I mean, those southern states in a general don't really matter much to us, but you saw Bernie really take the Rust Belt. The question is, and these aren't states that are in play today, but as this primary continues, where does that Rust Belt go? Do they stay with Bernie, or can Biden swoop in and take some of those away? And then what is the dynamic of this very unique campaign that Michael Bloomberg has been running, with hundreds of millions of dollars on the air for a long time, foregoing, the first few states and putting all of his eggs in one basket, so to speak, on this one. So it'll be fascinating to see what that effect is and how this looks like. So yeah. I'm excited.
Mike Bloomberg is obviously he's coming for Pennsylvania because he opened up his campaign office this week in East Liberty, and I think that this is going to be a really interesting. We know Pennsylvania is going to be a battleground state, obviously, but I think I think Bloomberg is going to make things very interesting here. Particularly when it comes to the newly resurgent Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And Pennsylvania went red for the first time in a long time in the general last time. But we found that our primaries have gotten much more progressive.
Sure.
So that's going to be interesting. We know how that's going to play out in Allegheny County. We know how it's going to look in the Southeast, but we don't know what that's going to look like in the Rust Belt.
Right.
So we'll have to see.
That's one of the things that I've wondered. I've been actually kind of surprised at and pleasantly surprised that if it wasn't Elizabeth Warren, that Bernie Sanders, one of those two, was able to actually bring that strong progressive voice. They're bringing it deep into this primary season, and so I would think no matter what the turnout, where we end up in terms of a nominee, I think that the progressives are probably going to be they're going to need to be appeased, I think, to support a Mike Bloomberg or a Joe Biden on the ticket in November.
I think that the progressive part of the party is going to stick with Bernie for the most
Sure.
part. Elizabeth Warren has not proven successful in any electoral approach at gaining any of that. So what's going to happen? I think if it's Bloomberg, they're gone. They're going to go third party. They're going to undervote. There is no way the progressive wing of the party is really going to pull for Mike Bloomberg. I think they can for Biden,
Right.
most of them. I think that'll work. That'll be the dynamic there. The question is does Biden take people that are on the fence in that center part? We have the far left and the far right. They're not going to move. The Trump diehards aren't going
Right.
to move. And then there's the registration shift that we've seen in Pennsylvania, which has been massively pro-Republican. If you look at the registration numbers since 2016, you're looking at the Republicans have netted about 100,000 new voters in just Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
That's not counting the center of the state, the sort of, what James Carville famously referred to as Alabama.
Right.
Now we know in the eastern part of the state that's trending more blue, but I don't think that those numbers, no, I know those numbers don't make up for what we've lost. I mean, even Philly, as of October, had registered 15,000 more Republicans than Democrats.
Wow.
Those numbers are closely approaching something that's insurmountable in a general election. And not only for this election, but for a generation to come if this keeps happening. And it really is the West Virginia model. You saw this kind of thing happen in West Virginia, and that's a state that we were Democrat and we've just lost. And after that, you saw their Supreme Court be upset, and we're seeing that in Pennsylvania, where they want to redistrict our Supreme Court so you're not running statewide, so they would actually go into districts. There's no way for us to have a Democratic Supreme Court if that happens.
Right.
So I'm looking at this not just this year, but for years to come. And the effect that Bernie Sanders has on a party with young voters, if something happens and we go into a split convention and he doesn't get it, I think we're going to be in serious trouble with youth voters. I mean, it's going to be tough to get them back after something like that happens.
And that's something we'll talk about later. Obviously, running mates is a place where candidates can sort of make up that deficiency. But the best decisions aren't always made in that area. Just to update you really quick. So CNN is projecting. They're projecting Biden wins now in Alabama, North Carolina, and Virginia. Sanders in Vermont, and of course the huge upset in American Samoa for Mike Bloomberg.
That's tonight's hashtag, isn't it?
So you mentioned this. A little. Hashtag American Samoa if you have questions. You talked about this just a little bit a minute ago. Can we relate something from Biden playing well in the South to Biden playing well in Central Pennsylvania, in North Central Pennsylvania, places like that?
Well,
or 20 miles down the road. I mean, we're talking.
If you look at the 16 map, no, because Hillary won all those southern states, and Biden is proven to be the replacement there. He's the moderate that's winning there, so that's what we're seeing. But in Central Pennsylvania, in the primary, Bernie won.
Right.
So that's going to be telling, because obviously we look at that as Alabama, but in the Rust Belt, rural areas look a little different than they do in the South.
I think we have that map. Do we have the 2016 map that we could take a gander at? Oh, it is up. Thank you, Jake.
There we go.
Jake Mislivchik, our producer tonight. So we talk about Pennsylvania. What about these other Rust Belt states? What about Wisconsin? What about Michigan? Are those going to be able to rebound blue, do you think?
Well, that's where this election this year is going to be won and lost. If Trump can hold those states, he's going to win the South. We know what's going to happen in the Northeast for the most part, and what's going to happen in California and those areas. The question is what happens in huge states with a lot of electoral votes like Pennsylvania, like Ohio. What happens there? And if you look in 16, I mean, that map shows all the green areas were Bernie areas. So if you tell Hillary Clinton, if you're her strategist, you say, see green, go there.
Right.
She did not go to Wisconsin one time. She lost all but one county in Wisconsin and didn't feel the need to show up there. So that obviously is a big strategic issue. In Pennsylvania, every time she came here, she went to the cities. Meanwhile, Trump was in Ambridge. Trump was in Johnstown.
Right.
And I was on the ballot watching him come to Johnstown with 6,000 people outside that couldn't get in. I was at Ambridge with 4,000 people that couldn't get in. People coming from all over the place. And you started to see the vehicles were the same. So these people were traveling. And we're going to talk to Dave Souter tonight, who's the reporter for the Johnstown Tribune Review. So I'll be anxious to see, because he does a lot of the national reporting for them. But I think it's a little bit different of electorate if Biden comes in and can pull back some of those Rust Belt voters that Hillary absolutely lost. And a lot of that was self-inflicted. That wasn't really party. That was, deplorable me.
Right, exactly. And you talked a little bit about, you mentioned a little bit at the top about the obvious machine-driven coalescence around Joe Biden that's happened in the last 2 days. I mean, you've been behind the scenes of campaigns on both sides of things. How do you kind of envision this kind of thing went down? I mean, obviously, when you have someone like Pete Buttigieg who won Iowa and he had a second place, what kind of thing? What level of person do you think had to sort of start this, bring it all together, and really kind of get the ball?
I mean, obviously, you're expecting Tom Perez to be part of that, but Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States.
Sure.
So the level of power players in the party that are supporting him, the donor base, absolutely, like the establishment donor base wants Biden. They do not want a Bernie candidacy. There's no doubt about it. So there's no doubt that there were a ton of establishment level people. You've seen a lot of union support come out for him. The firefighters were out early for him. I mean, it's just been across the board. The whole machine has really rallied behind him after that big win in South Carolina. And they've all come forward. Buttigieg, I think, was the smart play. You get him out of the race because he actually did win a primary.
Right.
So if he steps down and says, all right, I'm calling it a day, it really makes it look ridiculous if Klobuchar and these other candidates that haven't won anything stay in.
Right.
And that worked very effectively, and obviously they endorsed him. So now Elizabeth Warren's still in. We'll see what happens after tonight. If she doesn't pull out anything, how she can justify staying in and continuing to raise money. And then my understanding is I think Tulsi Gabbard's still a thing.
Is
I don't
she?
really know why.
Wow.
There's all those conspiracy theories about her. She's going to be like a third-party spoiler or something like that.
I think Mike Bloomberg is the third-party spoiler at the moment. So that role's
at the
already
moment,
taken. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I am really interested to see how this very unique campaign strategy he's put together works out today. I don't know. I don't think it's going to play, but we'll see.
Right. And we will be we later coming on later today. We are going to have Allegheny County Council person Bethany Hallam, and she is still firmly, I believe, maybe she'll tell us different, in the corner of Elizabeth Warren. Why do you think she's still in? Why do you think she's still involved? I mean, if the idea is, she and Bernie both come from that progressive edge, she obviously hasn't been able to do much of anything. Why do you think she's still there, and why hadn't she sort of tried to coalesce her base? I would assume around Bernie, but I don't know.
Bethany?
They obviously had their. Oh no, I'm sorry,
Elizabeth
Warren.
Yeah,
we'll ask Bethany later.
Yeah, I really don't know.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren has a base that would probably fit decently well with Bernie. Overall, her campaign has been one of the least impressive of people that I thought were going to do really, really well.
Yeah.
I recently characterized her as someone that's become a caricature of herself. She was always so serious about policy.
Right.
And the stuff that she has on her website, I was not impressed with. I really thought her trade stuff was a disaster, which is huge right now. Bernie has proven to be much better on working class voters than her.
Yeah.
I think that's been a problem. She just hasn't run a real presidential style campaign, and she's really gone into all this identity stuff. We all like to watch her smack the hell out of Bloomberg a little bit in the debates, but
Sure.
It got to be to the point where that's all it was. At least that's how I felt.
Right.
And it was like, all right, at some point, are you going to tell people what you stand for? And that's always my criticism of Democrats. We love to tell people what we won't stand for.
Right.
When are we going to start telling people what we do stand for? Because that's where I think we die in places like the Rust Belt. They want to know if you're going to stand for something and what that is, and if you're going to fight for them.
And I think part of we it is a party of, it's certainly a more divided party, I think, now than it's ever been, despite there should be that sort of chewy Trump center we should all be able to sort of get around
and
bite into. But there's still it really hasn't happened. And I don't know if a Biden or a Bloomberg is going to be the person to unite, to unite the party. I feel like the whole blue, no matter who, is going to work better for a Bernie Sanders than it's going to work for Biden, but even more so, I think, Bloomberg.
Well, so the problem with Bernie is you have, like, the areas of Allegheny County where I live, you're going to have a lot of people that just will not vote for a socialist, and they will vote for Trump.
Right.
They will. Like, people where I live that are Democrats that literally have bought into the idea that a socialist is bad because they've really bought into that marketing, will vote for Trump.
Yeah.
If it's Biden, and for some reason the progressives don't vote for him. And I think the bulk of them will.
Right.
Unless you have a lot of young people and far left progressives who feel that the machine took over and screwed over their candidate.
Right.
That's going to be a problem, and that's where a third party person comes in. They're not going to vote for Trump.
Right.
So, yeah, if it's Bernie and the Rust Belt people won't vote for him, those are Trump votes. Right. And that's the only concern about Bernie Sanders.
Right.
On the other end, he won in the primary. Now, the question is, who were those voters that really carried him in those primaries in the Rust Belt? Because he carried them well.
And do you think that, I don't know, it seems to me that I think that there's such a bad taste in everyone's mouth from 2016 when things came out about how the Democratic National Committee, there was all this sort of, the bad blood.
Schultz.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff,
there was an attempt to make sure that Bernie wasn't the nominee. Now, regardless of what would have happened on an even playing field, who knows? I think it still probably would have been the same thing. But you don't know. I mean, he really had momentum when they did this thing. I do think that I would worry about a disillusioned progressive voter just staying home. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't think that in the situation we're in this country with Trump. But I still think that there is that, and I know people and have talked to people who have said that. So
that they'll stay home, or they'll undervote the presidential.
That they'll stay home, or they won't vote the presidential.
Yeah, they'll undervote the presidential, and they'll vote down ticket. I would worry more as far as the progressives falling on a third party sword.
How much do you, when you're looking at a candidate, and I'm not asking you to endorse him, but when you're looking at a candidate, one of the things, especially younger progressive voters, one of the things that really angers them is when you talk about electability. I saw an Elizabeth Warren T-shirt. It said, "She is electable if you fucking vote for her." That was sort of the
imagine that.
Exactly. So, how much do you sort of and folks, how much do people take that idea of electability into account when they're picking a candidate? And again, that idea of electability is also very subjective because you're still using your own lens to kind of look at that.
Yeah, it is, and it's how you define it. And depending where you are in the political spectrum, you define it a little bit differently. On a national scale, there's a lot of room to move on what is electability.
Right.
You look at Barack Obama. Now, this is a great one. A lot of people early in that 2008 primary didn't think a black candidate was electable at the presidential level. They didn't think that you could do that nationally. They didn't think we were ready. But he found a way to run a great campaign to mobilize the black vote. And that wasn't just because he was a black candidate. He did a great job targeting those areas. And his operation has been used in southern states since then to mobilize the black vote. So, I mean, it was just really a brilliant campaign. It was timely. It was well messaged. It was more of a cleaner corporate look instead of like this sort of used car sales flags ads that we tend to see in political. So it was a really different and exciting and ethereal and overarching message that he had, and it worked. So it's really hard on a national level to say electability. If you have a decent small dollar donor base, you have a message, and you have a path, then you're electable.
Right.
And what we're seeing right now with a lot of these candidates, and what was really going to start to kill Joe Biden was money.
Right.
Just like Hillary, these are races that have maximums. There's only so much you can give. And once his donor base started drying up, just like for Hillary, Bernie has got millions of small dollar donors, just like Obama did. And it is just an ATM spewing money into his coffers. And Obama had the same situation. So with the establishment, they are playing an establishment game. Yeah. That's the game they're going to play. Do they have what they need to bring more bring more donors in to the fold for Biden and keep funding him through, give him viability and help him survive all the way through? That's what we'll see. Does this establishment strategy work? And viability in today's day and age looks very different in social media than it did even in 2008.
Right. We have on the phone. We have a friend of the Pittsburgh Current, sometimes columnist, contributor, political strategist, Kieran Young, Pittsburgher. He's actually on the ground in Texas. He's in Houston, working on a state rep campaign down there. Kieran, how are you tonight?
It was actually a U.S. Senate race, but
apologize.
I'm doing well. Polls are closing, and there are long lines around the state. So we'll see. It'll probably be a late night here in Texas.
What kind of turnout are you seeing that down there? I mean, you said there's some polls with long. I mean, does it feel larger than expected? And do you feel that is down ballot races, or are you feeling that there's some energy down there for the presidential?
So what I've noticed is, and this is all anecdotal, and a lot of it is today. I've been driving around, going to different polling locations, and talking to friends who are out voting. It's taking relatively long to vote here in Texas. There are long lines. I actually waited in line with two elderly people for about 30 minutes to vote in the middle of the day, which was relatively long in my opinion. But there are long lines and turnout for the Democrats. So part of the way that Texas is set up is the Democratic voting machines are just for the Democratic ballot. And in a lot of cases in Democratic strongholds, you have 5 or 6 voting machines sitting on the other side of the room that are just used for Republicans and no Republicans showing up.
Wow.
And an elevated turnout across the Democratic side in Democratic strongholds, I would say, from my anecdotal opinion from talking to people in Dallas and Austin. And I think this is going to be a state that Bernie Sanders might be able to pull out.
What makes you say that? What are the kind of the signs for you there?
Well, he's been leading in the polls, and you're seeing elevated levels of youth turnout and youth engagement in this election. And there really is a lot more energy around the presidential than there is anything else. And I think that's what people are turning out to vote for. And he has the strongest base, the strongest volunteer operation, a lot of very passionate supporters who are willing to go to the end of the earth for him when it comes to giving and knocking doors and volunteering. So I think he's done quite well in the state in a way that Joe Biden hasn't. Now, Mike Bloomberg is the X factor here. He hasn't been on the ballot anywhere else, but he has a strong presence here. I was actually just at a Mike for Black America event in the Acres Homes neighborhood of the city of Houston. And it was relatively well attended, and the mayor of the city, Sylvester Turner, has endorsed him. So we'll see if Mike is able to chip into Joe Biden's number here in Texas.
Between Biden and Bloomberg, from what you've seen, just to sort of put a fine point on it, are you seeing? I mean, do you think that Bloomberg's really is? Do you think he's cutting into that core enough that he's gonna appeal votes?
He is cutting into Joe Biden's core support amongst Southern Black people,
right?
Especially older people, meaning my parents' generation. People 50 to 80, 90. He is cutting into those people that would have normally been Joe Biden supporters. And it looks like he's getting out to early leads in some of the other southern states as well. So we will see what comes from Bloomberg tonight. I think that's going to be a real interesting plot.
What do you think makes him attractive to African American voters who have, in a lot of places there has been a lot of support by African American voters for Joe Biden. What is Bloomberg sort of bringing to the table, and are his policies like his stop and frisk policies when he was mayor of New York? Are those kinds of things coming out, or are these things that people are sort of willing to overlook because they like the other stuff he brings to the table?
Well, people are talking about that. People are talking about some of the policies that came out of New York City, but they're also talking about the Greenwood Initiative, which is the plan that he has put out for Black America, which talks a lot about home ownership and increasing Black wealth, as opposed to just pulling Black people out of poverty. So that it's a very interesting conversation, and I think Mike Bloomberg has found an audience among some older Black people here. Especially in the South, and I think a lot of them look at the amount of money that he spent in their community. I mean, the event that I went to where the mayor was of the city of Houston, Sylvester Turner, that was specifically a Mike for Black America event.
Wow.
They're going to major cities around the country and just doing events that are targeted at Black people, and it's being noticed how much money they're spending, giving away tons of T-shirts, yard signs. They're doing a lot of the things that a certain type of regular Democratic voter really likes, and I think in some cases it will be effective. The thing is to see if it's effective enough for Bloomberg to come out ahead of Joe Biden and possibly take down Bernie Sanders in a state like Texas.
Right. Now you've been in Texas now for a few months, and you obviously know Pennsylvania elections. Are the things that Bloomberg is doing in Texas? How do you see those playing with voters here in Western PA, statewide, but Western PA in particular?
I think that they'll play well in the same way. I actually know that Mr. Bloomberg had an office opening in East Liberty, which is my home.
Right.
And there were about 300 people there. So I would assume that the investment that he's making in communities, Black communities like here in Houston, if he makes that same investment in other Democratic strongholds in other areas, I think he will come away with quite a few delegates.
Speaking of courting African American voters, have you seen any kind of sight of the Donald Trump Black Voices for Trump community centers down there? Have you witnessed that at all? In either that or just in general through your work down there, are you seeing Trump's efforts to sort of court Black voters, through by using job numbers? Are you seeing that work at all?
I haven't seen any of that. I've just been hearing about Eileen Kelly's effort to court Trump voters and completely ignoring Black voters in Allegheny County. I heard she's opening up the Trump Center.
That's just a rumor, I think. We think. So do you miss that? I mean, obviously this would be something that you'd be like two hands in if you were here. Do you miss not being here for this?
Well, I mean, I do miss not being home, but I mean, I get my absentee ballot in a few weeks, so. I'm excited to vote in Pennsylvania, but I do miss some of the things that are going on. As somebody who's run in Allegheny County before and understands the committee process, some of the grievances that are being brought forward by people like Bethany Hallam about the way the committee works and trying to make structural changes. Yes, those are all things that I would have been involved in if I was home, and I still am somewhat involved in behind the scenes, talking to people. I do miss being home, but at the same time, Houston is a really nice city. It was 71 degrees on Christmas.
Wow. That is a nice change from whatever it was here, that's for sure. So just sort of leave us here as we sign off. Leave us with a kind of what you're expecting to see tonight nationwide.
Well, I expect to see Mike Bloomberg pick up quite a few delegates. He might win a few states tonight. I also expect to see Joe Biden win a few states tonight. And Bernie Sanders will end up probably being the overall winner of the night. It looks like he's going to clean up in California, which we'll find out about later on tonight, like really late. And he was leading in a lot of the polls here in Texas, leading Joe Biden. And this is after the onslaught of Bloomberg ads and spending that was done here. So we'll see if he can win a couple of these big states like Texas or in California, and hopefully we'll see sometime tonight whether or not he can win Massachusetts, because it looks like his campaign is really trying to put the foot on the neck of Elizabeth Warren and force her out of the race.
Absolutely.
And by winning her home state, they could put her in a position where she doesn't have a viable path to the nomination, and people are calling on her to get out.
Kieran, why do you think that she's stuck in as long as she has?
She's a really, from what I understand, being around her, just a few rallies that I've had the chance to attend. She is a very, very proud woman,
right?
And she's the only woman in the race. And there's a voice in the Democratic Party and voices in the Democratic Party that want to be heard, and a lot of those voters are women. And women of color, and I think she's staying in this race partially to be a voice for women. And quite honestly, I don't blame her. If she wants to go all the way to the convention, I believe that they should continue to have her on the debate stage because she adds something to the conversation.
Great. Kieran Young, live from Houston. Let us know if any big updates down there, and we're looking forward to having you back home.
All right, I will let you know.
All right, man. Have a good night.
All right, later.
Erin, anything that Kieran talked about in terms of the Bloomberg effect in Texas? Anything about that surprise you?
That did surprise me.
Yeah.
The idea that black voters are, he's resonating with them. That especially, I mean, the stop and frisk stuff. I think a lot of that was real inside baseball for some of us. So I don't know how much that grabbed on to the low information voters, but that did grab me a little bit that he said that. But Texas, I mean, nobody knows what the hell's going to happen in Texas. I mean, that's really the state that nobody has a clue what's going to go down there. Not only in the primary, but that's a state that's been trending more and more blue with the Latino population and how they're moving. So, Texas is always interesting to watch these days.
Absolutely. There's no, I mean, as I said to Kieran, there's no question that Joe Biden plays well with African American voters, and I think it will be interesting to see once Bloomberg's headquarters in East Liberty is up and running a little longer. Once it sort of gets some momentum, that would be a major problem for Joe Biden if Mike Bloomberg is able to make the inroads with African American voters.
Absolutely, because that hasn't been an area that Bernie's really been strong with, and early on he had some trouble there. So that's going to be a key constituent base for Joe Biden's victory if Bloomberg is cutting into that somehow, and I wouldn't have imagined that, but if that happens, that's interesting.
Right. No, that's that is definitely a potential game changer. Speaking again of courting African American voters, what were your thoughts when the announcement was earlier this week or late last week when the announcement was made that Trump was going to be opening up his Black Voices for Hope Trump community centers? It's just sort of, I mean, I don't know. It always gets me is that when I hear something like that or see something like that, and you see something, we laugh and we're like, are you shitting me? But then there are so many people out there that buy into all that stuff that, into the whole Trump stuff. But I don't know. It would almost seem to me, I think it's almost insulting in a way that the attempt is even there. I mean, you've basically shut out a segment of the population when it comes to your decision-making process, when it comes to, the very easy task of when you're taking sides against white supremacists and non-white supremacists. It seems very easy to make the right choices there. And he's never been able to do that. I don't know. I think he's kidding himself thinking that he can make any reasonable inroads for into the African American community.
I mean, for somebody who's a lot of their strategy bordered on race baiting at points. And some of the things that he said, not just about race in this country, but, the comment about third world shitholes, which it was obviously taken as somewhat of a slur and looked at as a racially charged issue. I mean, we saw that throughout his entire presidency and his campaign. But, I mean, you just never know what the impact of something like that's going to do. If he does manage to put something there, I mean, the idea seems very egregious, but so is Donald Trump.
Right.
I mean, he's one of the most egregious human beings I've ever seen.
Yeah, right. He's not going to wake up and say, you know what, cancel the woke for Donald Trump T-shirts.
That's just not feeling real.
So, it's just, it's very strange.
I think it's inconsistent with my brand. No, like setting up Trump universities in black communities is right on line with his brand. So I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't put anything past the man, gold-plated daycares, who knows. So it seems incredibly egregious, but like that's him, that's his style.
So just a very early results in Massachusetts. It does show that Elizabeth Warren is running third behind Biden and then Sanders.
That's a problem.
It's early. It's just about 3% reporting, but
if that stays that way, that's not good.
I mean, that's the telltale sign, right? I mean, you have to be.
You have to win your home state,
right?
Like that's some Walter Mondale shit going on there. When you start losing your home state, that's not good. So that's been a great, and that conversation has happened about her as well as Bloomberg.
Right.
That conversation that he may lose New York.
Right.
Has also come up, and that's usually not a. I mean, I hate to say it's a litmus test these days because anything can happen, but when you lose your home state, that's usually not a good sign. So, I mean, like you said, it's early. We'll see what happens to those numbers as they come in more, but I can't imagine that's going to be a good sign for her if it stays that way.
Yeah, Bernie is way ahead in Vermont, which again was expected, of course. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see once we start moving westward, how things set up, or how things begin to shape up. Do you think we get a Rust Belt test tonight in Minnesota? Do you think that that's enough of a?
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see, but Amy Klobuchar, that's her home state.
Right.
She's, relatively popular there. These endorsements are proving to be
Right.
helpful as far as swaying voters for the candidates that dropped out. When when Amy Klobuchar drops out right before her home state votes, and
Right.
she tells her voters, "Hey, I want you to go for Joe Biden." That will that work?
Right.
I imagine that it may. It certainly worked for James Clyburn. It seems to be effective. So. We'll see if that happens. I think that's going to be the test for Minnesota. Does Amy Klobuchar swing it the way Clyburn did for South Carolina?
Right. Looking ahead, let's look ahead a little bit to the Pennsylvania primary, and we'll be doing this kind of jumping back and forth a little bit all night. But what do you think? What do you think are the main storylines when it comes to the sort of the Bloomberg? And we talked a little bit about this. The Bloomberg Biden kind of matchup. Is that something? I think that's where the focus is going to be. Do you think that Bernie has a chance to maybe sneak in and peel off some of that support? I mean, obviously there are in the city centers, he's going to have his supporters, but what are your thoughts on how this is going to play?
I mean, yeah, Bloomberg has come out and said that he and Biden are fighting for the same base of voters. So if Bloomberg does stay in and Biden is starting to climb back up and get a better campaign going, then there's an opportunity for them to split those voters and Bernie to sneak in, depending on where Elizabeth Warren shows up. But I don't think she's proving to be much of a threat, especially if Massachusetts doesn't go her way. I don't know how she stays in after that. So, yeah, that's definitely a good scenario for Bernie, is those two working against each other.
Right. And it seems to be, Kieran mentioned the party that the Bloomberg campaign was throwing in Houston, and I've actually seen a couple of notes come across that he's throwing some huge parties in city centers in a lot of different states. It just strikes me as it doesn't matter. It doesn't necessarily matter, at least for some time. Like I think he sticks out until the Pennsylvania primary. I mean, I think it would have to get really bad for Bloomberg. He spent dropping the bucket for him.
Yeah.
But he spent a lot of money thus far to even get this far into.
And there's no signs of him backing down. I mean, he was all over the news today saying, "No, I'm in it to win it, and I'm staying in. I'm not going anywhere." And I think he is going to try and see, if he is even considering getting out, how strong Biden is. I mean, one of the reasons he has demonstrated he got in was because he thought Biden was weak.
Right.
If Biden has pulled his shit together and it's going well, then we'll see what Bloomberg does. But I don't know that he's going anywhere. And we'll see what it looks like today, but I don't think he's going to drop out, and him and Biden are going to keep working for the same base.
Yeah. I don't know. I think when... What was that, Jesus? Jesus is talking to me, folks. The Lord is telling me that we have a special caller on the phone. We want to welcome on to the Pittsburgh Current Super Tuesday Live. We want to welcome Dave Suter of the Johnstown Tribune Democrat. Dave, how are you tonight? Did Jesus let me down, guys? Dave, are you there?
Can you hear me?
That's the beauty. That's the beauty.
Don't make fun of Johnstown people now. Come on.
No, Johnstown. I think they have at least 2 cell towers, right? Johnstown.
You guys are assholes.
Johnstown is a
Don't
place
make fun of Johnstown.
to sort of set up a little bit. I mean, the great thing that we're going to be talking to Dave about is sort of the Trump effect in those areas like Johnstown, like those rural counties that were as democratic as any place else, and now they're Trump territory.
And Cambria, which is where Johnstown is. We still have the courthouse there. We still have two Democrats and 1 Republican running the courthouse there. In 2014, I think I got 44% there in the general. So, and that was one of the more Democratic areas. It was the last bastion of Democratic politics in the collar counties, and we are just bleeding voters there like crazy. And it's not just regular voters.
Right.
It is Democratic committee people that ran for Democratic chair, former Democratic electeds. They are jumping ship and they are joining Republicans. So when people look at it and say, well, it's just these random people that are registering Republican. No, these are Democrats. They were people knocking doors. They were people working for Hillary, working for candidates like me, and they've gone to the other side. And that's fascinating.
Dave Suter, Johnstown Tribune Democrat. Do we have you on the line?
Yeah, is this better?
That's perfect. You're on with Charlie
We're good
and Erin.
now.
So yeah, I don't know if you got to hear a little bit what Erin was talking. She was talking about longtime Democrats out your way that were jumping ship and changing to Republican and voting for Trump. What kind of stuff are you seeing out there in terms of how things have changed over the last 4 years?
There's been a definite switch. Going back even further, when Congressman John Murtha died, and it's just been the 10-year anniversary of that. And I wrote an article. Democrats held an advantage about 55,000 ballpark to somewhere in the 20s, high 20s. Now both those numbers are 30,000, in the range of 30,000, 30 to 35. And Democrats only hold an edge of a few thousand. So there's been a definite switch over 10 years, and especially I think that got accelerated during the last few years leading up to President Trump in the election.
Do you think that when that district was gerrymandered to basically stretch from here, from Western PA, extreme Western PA, all the way out to Johnstown, when Keith Rothfuss won that seat, when that seat turned red in Johnstown, there was obviously, I think, with the right support from Johnstown, that seat could have maybe stayed blue. But was that an effect when that district was gerrymandered? Do you think that sort of gave Republicans an inroad?
Yeah, absolutely. That brought in, and it was a conservative Democratic district. They might have had the edge in numbers and stuff, but yeah, things switched over, and it definitely provided an opportunity to move in. And then the events culminated. Stuff came together where there's the differences on social issues, that these were old school Democrats, and the policies that nationally for Democrats on abortion, other issues, the voters here are more in line with the Republican thoughts on that, and that led to a lot of the switches. And then a lot of people around here like President Trump's personality. They connect with it, they relate with it. The example I used was today I was in, for an unrelated article, I was meeting somebody in a bar here, and it's not a place I regularly go, a little bit outside of town. I got there 20 minutes before he did, and I was sitting at the bar. I was a stranger, nobody knew me. Fox News was on. They're showing clips, and, comes up Mini Mike and Sleepy Joe, and everybody busts out laughing. 6 other people in the bar probably heard it 50 other times, but it cracked them up and he's got a name for everybody, and they loved it. And that appeals to a lot of voters around here.
And there's certainly there's that. I've seen people appeal to that side of Trump, but there's also, how are they able to turn off, and this is something Erin and I were talking about a little bit ago, how do they turn off the not so cutesy stuff of, Mini Mike? How are they able to ignore the way that Trump has spoken about and has treated women in the past, and how Trump is clearly shown an empathy toward white supremacists in certain situations? How when you're down there with some of those voters, how are they able to sort of take part of Trump? Now, granted, I'm sure that there are some folks everywhere who love all of Trump when it comes to that kind of thing, but I'm not going to make that generalization about everybody. So how are they able to sort of square taking the parts of Trump that they like and leaving the rest when the rest is so kind of heinous?
Sure, and I don't want to lump them all together either or anything like that. With the stuff toward women, I hate to say it, an old school mentality, and some are like, boys will be boys, you hit on the girl, that kind of stuff. I don't mean to make that much light of it, but it's an older mindset of that, and they can just gloss over it. I think a lot of them with the race, anything that's like some others might consider racist and stuff. I don't think you hear comments around here and jokes and stuff like that, and I think a lot of people think, well, that's not racist. That's just how you speak sometimes, and there's a forgiveness that comes along with it and acceptance because I've grown up, I've been here my whole life. I've heard all those jokes and comments. And a lot of people maybe don't think it's racist or anything, and it just kind of gets glossed over to a degree.
Hey, Dave, how you doing? It's Erin.
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
I don't know if I'm good with this role reversal of the interview switch here, but I'll give it a shot.
I know all those years of you interviewing me when I was running. Now you're gonna pay.
I know, that's what I figured. I was kind of afraid of this part.
No, it's good stuff. No, obviously, we're not just seeing, people switching party. We are seeing longtime Democrats, party people, committee people switching party, electeds. I mean, this is significant that they are leaving the Democratic Party. What do you think? Why is that happening? That people that were longtime Democrats, people that knocked doors for me and supported me, are now going to the other side. What would you attribute losing actually party officials in that area?
That's hard to tell, yeah, and I've seen that too. I guess just fed up with a system that they felt wasn't working, and so switch over. But that is surprising to me that you get voters and things. Like you said, there's been people in the party who have been active and they've switched over, and I guess they just feel that the message coming from Republicans now is more in tune with and more in line with what they believe. But yeah, that's pretty rare. It's something you wouldn't have seen 30 years ago. That kind of stuff didn't happen. But I guess just a switch in which party they feel is representing their beliefs.
Do you feel that, and I know that after 16 there was sort of a grassroots push with more liberal people in the party in Cambria. I know I saw that. Do you think that had an effect on some of the mainstream party people? And I'm even talking about younger people, like people that were part of the Pitt Johnstown Democrats that were involved in the party infrastructure, leaving and going to the other side. Do you think that it has something to do with the other people that came into the fold after 16?
I'm not sure. I don't know how much that is having an effect yet. It might. There is a generational thing, no doubt about that, and you can see that nationally and everything. And it might be playing into it, and that coming in with some of those younger ideas and more, ideas from this era don't necessarily fit with what the older generations believe. Yeah, one question I've been asking people. I'm doing some stories, and whenever I ask them politically, I said, "What's the word socialist mean to you?" And you get the college students like, that means, better healthcare and stuff like that, and that'll be along. But you talk to somebody else from an older generation or 60s, 70s, 80s, that's a curse word. That's a horrible thing to say. That's all the negative images that they bring to mind with that. And there's a difference on that, and that does come down to the party difference. Now, the issue with that going forward is, Cambria County's population is an older population. So what influence that younger generation can have coming up, how soon that will be, I'm not sure. That's just going to be a matter of time going along and see how things develop.
And one of the other things that I've noticed in those areas, and when you talk about the issue of trade in more metropolitan and city areas, I mean, it's just not an issue that anybody talks about. It doesn't resonate with anybody. It's not an issue. But, of course, and you remember through NAFTA and the TPP in areas like Cambria, I mean, that's all they wanted to talk about. You had steelworkers in that area doing panels and educating people on what was going on with trade, and that was a big discussion. When the next president's sworn in, we will have commemorated 50 years of a trade deficit and not a single solution in sight. We just passed NAFTA 2.0. Is that resonating in that area at all? Are people grabbing onto that? Are they thinking it's going to be a solution? Are they giving Trump credit for that policy?
I think they're giving credit for that policy. I think a lot of was just get rid of NAFTA, like that kind of mindset, like that's bad, get rid of it. I'm not sure what's been put in its place yet. I'm not sure anybody can really tell what's going to come about because of it. All the moving parts are going to go on with, and that, like any major thing like that, it takes a while to play out and see what's going to develop. So I think that's kind of where it's at. That's the feeling I'm getting when I talk to people, but I might be talking to the wrong people, and there might be a completely different opinion on it. But yeah, I think it's something along those lines of they wanted to see something different, and now it's just trying to understand what has been put in place and how this will develop.
And the last thing I want to talk to you about is I talked to somebody at the DNC a couple months ago who was in town in Pittsburgh, and they were asking about Trump voters. And I said, oh, no, the people that voted for him, I think they're still solidly with him. And the gentleman said to me, well, are they better off than they were 4 years ago? And I said, you're asking the wrong question. And he said, what do you mean? I said, the question you should be asking them is, are they worse off than they were 4 years ago? Because that was the trend for them since 1971, is everything kept getting worse and getting worse and getting worse. Do you think that for voters in Cambria County that they are worse off now than they were 4 years ago?
No, and the reason I say that is because Johnstown's been going slow. It's been a long, slow decline of a Rust Belt story. So I don't know if I want to say level out to agree, but also, I mean, the population drop is still there. The unemployment's gone down, but that's just because nationally everything's gone. It's still behind the state and the nation in terms of that. But, yeah, I don't think you find too many people who say that they feel worse off than they did 4 years ago. So maybe a breaking even sense. But, again, probably in the last decade, probably 1,000 people left the county. And I looked this up the other day. In the last 10 years, on average, there's 4 less people in Cambria County every day. So that hasn't gone away. That decline hasn't stopped in terms of that. But I'm thinking that people who are still here, no, they don't think their life is worse than it was 4 years ago.
Well, and that's going to be key in this election, I think.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, what do you looking ahead to the PA primary? What do you see happening, or where are you seeing support between the Democratic candidates down there, out your way? What are you seeing in terms of, who's ahead, who's sort of, making an impression out there?
Even before the last few days when things kind of turned with the dropouts and the endorsements, I can think of only one time I heard anybody say anybody other than Biden or Bernie, and there was one Mayor Pete, and it stood out. Somebody told me that to support. I think we'll go towards Bernie establishment board, and those and the two consistent answers have gotten from Biden. So there's going to be Elizabeth support, I just come across the two aren't the answer. Perhaps I mentioned on the public.
Dave Suter from the Johnstown Tribune Democrat. Thank you very much for spending some time with us tonight, and hopefully we can talk to you again on April 28th.
Sure.
Great. We apologize for the technical difficulties coming out at the end there, and that was because Dave had a lot of good stuff to say from some perspectives that a lot of us might not think about. And I mean, this is a guy who's, I mean, it's a different, and for someone who's campaigned out there, it's a whole different animal out there, isn't it?
Oh yeah, when you're in rural areas and you're campaigning, it's a very different dynamic, and it's very frustrating to. I live in Allegheny County. I work in the city, so all my friends live in the city, and I spend a lot of my time with liberals in the city. So it's always fun trying to talk to people about what is happening in those areas. Explaining that they're not a monolith. I mean, that is what frustrates me most of all is they look at people in those areas and they just look at them as monolithic. And that is not fair. People are stunningly nuanced, and they're just as nuanced there as they are here in the diversity we see in inner city liberal voters. So getting them to understand that they're not stupid, their issues are just a little different. They're very well educated on things like trade and energy. Like those are things that those voters know a lot about, and they're given a lot of information about that. Criminal justice reform, not so much.
Right.
Those are other areas. It's not that they don't care about issues. It's their issues are a little different.
Right. And it seems to me that the issues that are different are quality of life issues for a lot of people, and maybe not people that live down the street or across the road or across the field or however that works out there. But it's still their quality of life issues for very real people. And, that's a large swath of people who are making decisions. And I guess we all make decisions based on, certain decisions based on what's best for us.
Sure.
But it really seems hard to kind of crack that force field of, we need to kind of look out for other folks too. Mm-hmm. Is that because it is tough in a lot of those areas. A lot of those areas have been depressed for a long time.
Sure. And And abject poverty in rural
Sure,
areas
right.
is a different dynamic. I mean, there is no public transportation. There is no access to any kind of public health services. You're looking at restrictions in broadband. You're looking at well water, which is always an issue if you're fracking in those areas. You're looking at septic systems. The entire infrastructure is different. And on a very huge study that they did on Trump voters, and I've done a ton of research on Trump voters the past few years since he won, they found that the average Trump voter actually makes $71,000 a year, which is significantly above the national average. Yet what they found was they suffer from lack of social mobility, lack of economic access to capital.
Right.
So all of these things that we have here, you take somebody that makes $71,000 a year here in the city, they have access to all kinds of resources. They have social mobility, they have access to capital. There's all these opportunities that they have that the person making the same amount of money does not have in Cambria County, does not have in Somerset County. And by the way, nobody's out there screaming and yelling for their cause. What they're hearing on national media is what's happening in more urban areas.
Right.
And they have felt slighted for a long time because, like I said, 1971, we went into a trade deficit. That has continued every single year.
Right.
NAFTA actually put it into overdrive. The China agreement that Bill Clinton did, he touted it as a 100-to-1 deal. They're giving 100 concessions and we're going to give one, and that is we agree to keep doing business as usual. And China cleaned our clock on currency manipulation. They are still cleaning our clock on energy, as far as they have collapsed our entire solar industry, bought it all, took the intellectual property, took it to China, and they're killing on it. So even when we talk about alternative energy, that's a trade issue that nobody wants to talk about. And what I love about rural voters is they want to have that conversation, and they're really mad at the national level. Nobody is having that conversation. And we just passed another dog shit trade deal.
Right.
And, it's going to take some time for everybody else to see that it didn't solve the fundamental problems with trade, because we're just wimps and we don't do that. There's only been one trade bill that ever was going to deal with multinational corporations and tax breaks. And that was the Burke Act in 1973, and it never saw the light of day, and we've never done that since. So the people in those areas deserve leaders that are going to address those issues. They're not getting them.
How do Democrats go in there and try and change their minds? How do they try and make a difference? I mean, is it even, they've waited so long for what they felt was somebody who thought like them, somebody who listened to them. Even if they didn't, Donald Trump doesn't know their pain and their suffering, but he listened to stories about their pain.
He knew they were in pain and they were suffering.
Exactly.
Though. That's what he did do. And when he said, "Make America Great Again," and I know everybody laughs at that, but here's the thing. I live in an area where there's New Ken, and back in the day, in the 80s and before that, New Ken was this robust little city. You could walk down Fifth Avenue and get custom-made shoes, designer drapes, a custom-made dress, good cannoli, whatever you wanted in your own backyard. People would be out doing the nightlife till 2-3 in the morning in their Sunday best. And one of the great Democrats in Western Pennsylvania, Bill Caroselli, was talking to me about this once, and he's passed since then, and he said, and they lived that life and they didn't know they were middle class. And that's the truth.
Right.
They didn't know they were middle class because all they knew is they wanted for nothing, and they got it all in their own backyard. When Donald Trump said, "Make America Great Again," that's exactly the people that he was talking to.
That's the picture that they went back to.
That is the image that he created. And even though they knew he wasn't going to do it, the fact that he knew they wanted that and was willing to tell them that, even though there's no chance of giving that economy back, it was just nice to hear somebody say it.
Right.
And instead of saying, basket of deplorables, which was the alternative.
Right. We are moving on through Super Tuesday Live at the Pittsburgh Current. Checking the national results, there hasn't been a whole lot of change since Biden has been declared the winner in Alabama, except Elizabeth Warren has started to make a bit of a resurgence and taken the lead in Massachusetts, which I am a liar. That has flip-flopped since I last looked at it. So it's going to be interesting to see how the night plays out. In particular, you would almost kind of hope that Elizabeth Warren would get that sort of moral victory, I guess, if nothing else. And Go ahead.
Yeah, MSNBC has a story up right now that just came out, and it's Bloomberg fails to win over key constituencies, and they are saying that exit polls are showing that he's lagging behind Joe Biden among the constituent bases that he thought he was going to get. He's winning just 13% of Democratic primary voters who said they would prefer a candidate who can beat Trump. So that viability argument that I can beat Trump, it's according to the exit polling they have in this race, they're not seeing it. It's not landing. So that's the first sign that we have that the Bloomberg effect may not be as effective as we thought. But we'll see how it ends up at the end of the day. Right now, it's not looking great. It said he's struggling to gain traction among college graduates, older voters, and independents.
Well, one voter that he has attracted some attention from is Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto. And I got to sit down with the mayor late last week, and we talked about a wide variety of topics, a lot of which we will have on PittsburghCurrent.com tomorrow. The mayor and I talked about the situation with the Allegheny County Democratic Committee, which I know that we will talk about tonight as well. So check that out tomorrow. But tonight we talked about, or last week we talked about his choice, his decisions in picking a candidate. Now, I will say that we recorded this, I think, 2 or 3 days before Pete Buttigieg dropped out of the race, and so he was thinking he would go Mayor Pete or Mike Bloomberg. So it's interesting to see, and I think you'll see from the interviews one of the most important things to him, and it's a Peduto policy, which is the environment, and that's what he's really looking for. So I think we're ready to go to that interview. My sit down with Bill Peduto. So we're here at Super Tuesday. This is sort of the beginning, in my opinion anyways, the beginning of that make or break time for candidates. We're now going to see the primaries really start coming in, in rapid succession. Do you see a clear leader at this point in the the Democratic presidential nomination?
I mean, going into this evening, it seems to be that Sanders is ahead. Yeah. However, we've only seen a part of America that has been asked which candidate they would like to support. It seems as if the Democratic electorate is looking for alternatives, and what you see in different areas is different candidates that are being kept in the race because of popularity. So I think that after Super Tuesday, there will be a more clear picture of who the front runners are and where the country will be really choosing between. Yeah.
Has anything surprised you? I mean, obviously, aside from the sideshow in Iowa, has anything surprised you in terms of candidates and how they've been? Were you surprised at how Mayor Pete, for example?
Yeah, a couple of things. First off, what we saw in Iowa, we should expect pretty much in every state. Yeah. With Pennsylvania switching to mail-in, we most likely will not know the results until at least 3 days after the November election. Right. And nobody is preparing for that. Right. But you're going to see that in state after state because many states are not permitting counties from opening up the ballots until the polls are closed, which means there is going to be just a manual time frame, and then there's going to be the insistence of getting it right when those numbers are released. So states are going to be hesitant to rush into it. Number two, on individuals, I wasn't surprised by Pete because, I mean, if you look back 4 years ago into the crowded field with Republicans, who is it that comes out of Iowa? Santorum. Right. And why was it? Because everybody else had their day. And when they had their day, then comes all of the bows and arrows and punches and everything else, and then the public gradually will turn. Pete hadn't really gone through that, and so he was in a strong position. Go out of that into New Hampshire, and all of a sudden, he's the target of each of the candidates. And then Klobuchar comes up. Right. So it's sort of a whack-a-mole process. And the person who gets to wear the crown is the one who then gets to have their crown broken by all the other candidates in a crowded field, and then the public looks for somebody else, and you go through that cycle. So I wouldn't call it surprising. I would say, you are seeing a consistent percentage of the Democratic electorate that is going towards Sanders, and you're seeing a certain percentage which is going towards the more moderate to conservative candidates, Biden, Klobuchar, Buttigieg.
Right. Are you surprised at how Vice President Biden has shown since we've really sort of kicked into things? He hasn't shown well in the early primary, or in the early caucuses and so forth. Are you surprised that he didn't come out once we actually got to the caucusing and primary time? Are you surprised that he hasn't come out stronger? And
I would say if there is a surprise, that's it.
Yeah.
It's very unusual to be in a position where you're the front runner for such a prolonged period of time and then end up fifth.
Right.
You can see it dropping to second, third, but his drop has been significant.
Right.
And it's come to the benefit of pretty much all the other candidates. A lot of people say that Buttigieg has been the main beneficiary from that, but it's spread. The Biden support is spread, and it'll be interesting to see how on Super Tuesday, as you see a lot of different types of states, where he ends up, and then throwing over the top rope Mike Bloomberg into that same mix, competing for a lot of that same vote. You have a different dynamic just by that one extra ingredient for Joe Biden.
Earlier on, you'd been asked about who you plan to back, and you said at that time that you were sort of leaning between Bloomberg and Buttigieg. So I actually have a couple of questions about that. But first, I want to ask you just straight up: have you made up your mind yet?
No. No, I have put out to the campaigns. I think that Pittsburgh is absolutely critical in making a peace between environmentalists and the building trades of labor. And both are the pillars of the Democratic Party, and we can't sacrifice one for the other. We have to find a way to get the Blue-Green Alliance working together. So I've made it a condition on my support that the candidate who supports a moratorium on cracker plant facilities being permitted until we have done an impact statement on the public health, environmental, and economic impacts. I don't see why that would be controversial. I think that before we allow a bakery to go into a neighborhood, we should know what the traffic impacts are. Why wouldn't we want to know the public health impacts of a cracker plant, or the environmental impacts, or the economic impacts? Because there are opportunity costs. But on the other side of that, I also believe that we need to do more in transitioning out of fossil fuels. So what I've asked candidates is to create an American Marshall Plan, a plan that would invest hundreds of billions of dollars into the areas that have been built around fossil fuels for over 100 years, the areas that build America, and create the jobs before we take the jobs away. In other words, I hear all the time when we want to build housing and we're going to tear down a publicly subsidized housing area, before we have that wrecking ball hit that building, we have to assure that there are places for people to live. Why aren't we doing the same thing with coal miners? How can the Green New Deal justify that it's a just transition when they're not giving people the job before they're taking it away, but saying ban it on day one? So far, no candidate has agreed to that. If one of the candidates would agree to that, whether that means whether Sanders would pivot or Warren would pivot, and they would be willing to say, yes, we haven't looked at this through the lens of Appalachia. We've looked at it through the lens of Brooklyn and Burlington, which it won't affect at all, but we haven't looked at it through Uniontown or Youngstown. If they'd be willing to do that and not say that the Green New Deal was brought down from the mountain and carved in granite, but actually could be and have labor unions, the workers of America, at the table to help to write that, well, then we can bring it together and we can have environmentalists and unions working on somebody's candidacy and not having to choose between one or the other. So nobody else seems to think of this as a major issue. I believe that if we don't resolve it before November, we lose Pennsylvania, we lose Michigan, and we lose Wisconsin. And Donald Trump will be the one deciding our environmental policy. And Donald Trump will be the one deciding workers' rights.
Speaking of the Green New Deal and also the cracker plant issue, those are two interesting topics for you, because when you came out and talked about the fact that there need to be a moratorium on cracker plants, you took criticism, of course, from some of your peers in other levels of government who were saying, you're handcuffing us, you're handcuffing our growth. Then when you came out with criticisms of the Green New Deal, then the environmentalists who have always seemed to have been, had your back, they came out.
Right.
So how do you square those two things up?
Because what I see is a party that is dividing itself around an ideology instead of around an implementation. Right. I see the Green New Deal, which 99% of it I agree with. I mean, what can you not agree with? It is a holistic approach to not only being able to recognize and address the biggest challenge of our lifetime, climate change, but do it in a way that provides jobs and opportunities in the future to people, retrains people, provides housing, everything that we would want in one statement. But that's what it is. It's a statement. Right. There's no budget for it. There's no enabling legislation that would change one law. There's no funding. It just says, this is where we need to get to. On the other side, I see the building trades and those within the unions who are saying, we're going to support a candidacy that says drill, baby, drill. Right. But what they're not understanding is that has a direct impact on all the development happening in the city, because all of these companies in tech, in medicine, in engineering, in autonomous vehicles and robotics are trying to recruit people from all over the world. And if our air quality is not good because we've built 5 cracker plants, they just killed the golden goose. Right. And that's their job. I mean, they're not going to be building new buildings. And once that cracker plant's done, there's going to be nothing left. So I have to be able to somehow communicate a message that respects both, but says to both, you've got to work together. You cannot work apart. There's too much at stake here in the fact that 4 more years of President Trump will mean the rest of our lifetimes of a Supreme Court that will never support workers' rights, that will never support environmental rights, and not only that, but 4 more years of going down a path that neither side wants to see happen. How do you get there? You don't get there from trying to convince one side over the other who's right and who's wrong. That only creates division. You get there by sitting, listening to both sides, and trying to find a workable solution. Is it possible? It better be, because if it doesn't happen, we lose.
And just finally, to kind of wrap up this whole Super Tuesday, do you think that Pennsylvania's still going to be relevant when it comes time for the April 28th primary?
I do. I think that there are still the candidates in the race that are going to be splitting up these delegate votes. And as you see state by state, you're seeing that division within the Democratic Party exemplified, especially when you start going coastal. And you're going to see that same thing happen as you start getting into the Midwest. And those votes are going to be divided. Pennsylvania is going to become one of the last most critical states. There will be a lot of emphasis that will be around jobs, energy, and environment. And we have the responsibility to help to define that in such a way that it doesn't divide us, but it brings us together in November. I'm going to put my attention into that. I'm going to try to do whatever I can. And if one candidate would decide to join with me and take the risk of upsetting both sides, which I obviously have done, sure, then that would be the candidate that I would stand with.
Bill Peduto, thank you very much for your time.
Good to see you, Charlie.
That was my talk last week with Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto. I wish I had gotten a chance to get back with him, because now that Mayor Pete is, I see it, folks. Now that Mayor Pete is out of the race, I don't know if that means that he is now squarely in the Bloomberg corner, or if he will look other places. I do know that we do know that his partner in crime, his compatriot on the at least on some topics, on the county side, Rich Fitzgerald, he came out along with 11 other countywide officials across the state, and came out for Joe Biden, which was, again, I think all part of that sort of let's all get behind Joe kind of a thing.
Yeah, that was definitely a coordinated effort.
So as we sit here tonight and we watch the results come in for president, again, one thing I was asking someone about, one thing that I asked the mayor about, I want to get your thought about this. Do you think Pennsylvania is still going to be still play a central part in this election process by the time our very late April 28th primary comes around? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually do think this time, because I think, they're going to be neck and neck for a while. Who knows if Elizabeth Warren gets out after this and she's still in. Bloomberg sounds like he's staying in. So, yeah, if we're still in a delegate battle, absolutely, Pennsylvania will matter. There's no doubt about it.
And, of course, during Pennsylvania, the primary was sort of not so much. I don't think we have too many questions in terms of the congressional races. We do have one disputed, one challenged race in the 18th district between Mike Doyle and Jerry Dickinson and Janice
Brooks.
Janice Brooks, yeah, Dr. Janice Brooks. And we are going to have Erin's interviews with Jerry Dickinson and Mike Doyle here in a bit. But let's talk a little bit about these congressional races, even as they sort of shape up into November. The first one I want to talk to you about a little bit is, a district that at least partially until the de-gerrymandering of it, a district that you're very familiar with as a candidate there. Talk about a little bit about Connor Lamb and the Trump anointed challenger, Sean Parnell. What do you think about that race? I mean, Sean Parnell is he's a war hero. He's the decorated war veteran. He is a conservative star, for whatever that's worth.
Sure.
What do you think about his how he's going to play up there? Because I mean, that's again, maybe not as bad as Cambria County and those regions out there, but it's a
50-50
yeah,
district.
it is, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a 50-50 district. Beaver County is solid red. It wasn't for years, but that conversion happened a while ago, and it performed very well for Trump. I imagine it will again. That's all of Connor's, or all of that county's in Connor's district. Then he has the North Hills of Allegheny, which was in it when I ran in it. And then he has my entire area, the Alley-Kiski Valley, which was not in. There was only a little bit of the valley in that race. So a lot of that blue collar stuff that you saw in Cambria and Somerset, that went there. And then the other part of the district in Allegheny, which goes up into Mount Lebanon and those surrounding areas. So at first, when Sean Parnell jumped in, on paper, he really looked like a strong, viable candidate. You know, you have an injured war veteran, published author. I think he wrote 2 books, Fox News analyst, national following on social media, definitely a donor base there. And on paper, he looked really, really good. His social media is still unbelievably active and really does a lot of the Trump talking points. And then he started speaking in public.
Right.
And
the downfall of so many people.
And then he opened his mouth and just not good stuff came out. He did not, from what I understand, impress labor. I saw him at the Building Trades Christmas party, and it was really funny. I'd said to somebody, "Oh, did you see Sean Parnell's here?" And they said, "Oh, where is he?" And I said, "Look around and find the 4 young Republicans standing together." And they looked over and said, "Oh, there they are." Like, there they are.
Can I get you a drink, Mr. Parnell? Would you like something to eat, Mr. Parnell?
Stood out in a room full of working class people. He stood out like a sore thumb. And you really shouldn't, as a Republican in that room. Like, that's really bad. So, yeah, it looked like they were there for some sort of Republican youth rally.
So do you think he was there for free Swedish meatballs? Because he's not gonna get the endorsement.
Well, he did go into the Labor Council, and my understanding is that did not go well. And he has made it very clear that why are you running, right? Why are you running? That's what we ask that is your 2 minutes. On average, when you meet a voter, you'll get one shot. This is why I'm running, to knock it out of the park and impress them. And his is because Donald Trump asked me to. And, I don't know that might be good enough for the Trump base in that district, but it's a 50-50 district.
Right.
And that's not going to be enough. And you've got to be prepared to answer questions about, in a labor district, which Connor definitely has the labor support. He had it when he won in the 18th. He had it when he won against Rothfuss. He has it now. You're going to have to go to bat with him with these working class people on things like NAFTA 2.0, on Janus, and environmental issues and where you are in those things. And my understanding is this guy just doesn't have a clue.
Right.
Everybody is saying he is utterly clueless. He knows nothing about policy or issues. And I think, and I've heard this before, the Republican notion of a district like that is just talk about guns and abortion and they'll vote for you.
Right.
And I just disagree with that. As somebody that lives in those areas, I just don't think that those voters are that monolithic. And I think that they're more knowledgeable on the economic issues that affect them. So, yes, I thought he was going to be quite a run. And I think he's going to be well funded. I think he's going to do the Trump talking points to a T.
Yeah.
We'll see how that resonates. I mean, it's possible that Connor could just blow him away because he doesn't know anything and a couple bad debates and maybe some self-inflicted wounds throughout a campaign. But, if this guy stays on message and just plays that national politics game, there's an argument to be made. But I originally thought Connor was in a little more trouble. And then after I started hearing the feedback on this guy, that's going to catch like wildfire.
Yeah. I live in the district also. And I don't know. I still sort of have a bit of a trepidation about how well he'll perform because there is, I feel like, the mentality of let's vote because Donald told us to, and this is handpicked by God to run for this district. That scares me a little more. Knowing some of my neighbors and relatives who live in the district, it worries me that despite the fact that I think Connor checks a lot of their boxes, even the boxes outside of that realm of a typical D. I mean, he checked those boxes enough for them to get rid of the human grumpy potato Keith Rothfuss. I mean, it was. It certainly didn't take much, but they were looking for an alternative. So it would be nice, hopefully, that he's done enough in this term to sort of earn himself a second one. But Sean Parnell I think he does scare me a little bit, although I think you're right that, and in a reference that most people won't get, he has that kind of look that, like, when he speaks, he's going to be, for those familiar with the Welcome Back Kotter TV show, he's kind of like Barbarino, like, but he's like, what? Where? Over there, kind of thing. And it's just, I do, you're right. I do think voters are in tune enough to not, hopefully to elect just anybody who kind of carries that designation.
Yeah, I think that the only real problem that is going to be posed for Connor in that district, and you can see Sean Parnell running with this, there's no doubt, in a district like that. And I've talked to a number of strategists that I really admire and asked them their opinion on this. And if it comes down to the wimp or the asshole, the asshole wins every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I mean, if it comes down to all things being equal, money and everything else, in a 50-50 district, in one like that, and Sean Parnell is he is constantly hitting Connor on, where do you stand on this? Where do you stand on that? Right. And that's the narrative they are going for. So if I'm the Lamb campaign, I am, working really hard on some powerful messaging, getting in front of some strong stuff, because that's the game they're playing. There's no doubt about it. And that can be lost because Sean Parnell is not afraid to go all in on that stuff.
And honestly, that's the theme of a lot of my family reunions with my Lawrence County family. It's the wimp or the asshole. Believe you me, the asshole wins every time.
Absolutely.
You cannot win an argument in a room like that. And I think you're right that I just saw something I think I could decipher, but the guy Rechtensteller, before we talk about Dickinson Doyle, the guy Rechtensteller,
Rushenthaler, yeah.
Hyman Himmler something.
And Bill Marks.
God bless you. And Bill Marks. What is Is there a chance there? I mean, they love that meathead down there, Guy Staller, Himmler, and I feel like he does seem unbeatable. Do you think that there's a chance that?
In this election, probably not. And I know Bill Marks, and he's a great guy. He's a veteran. He's a phenomenal candidate for that district. He really is. He's a hard worker. He gets it. But as somebody that's running a district like that, the numbers don't lie.
Right.
So it's going to be an uphill climb. Now, that does not mean that it is not a worthwhile cause to get in there and beat the hell out of that guy. I mean, absolutely. And Guy Rushenthaler is an easy person to do that too. He's low-hanging fruit. So I'm 100% behind Bill Marks going after him and beating him up for a while. And
he's the kind of guy, he walks down the street and he leaves a trail of bats and bricks to hit him with along the way. I mean, he has no sort of I don't know. I think that he thinks he's unbeatable, which at some point I think is probably going to be his downfall.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the 18th, the one that you actually
sure.
know pretty well this week after your interviews, your sit-downs with Jerry Dickinson and Mike Doyle. Let me first ask you again, as we talked about, Dr. Janice Brooks has run against Mike Doyle in the past, several times in the past. I think Dickinson, Jerry Dickinson, a law professor from Pitt, constitutional law professor, I think that he's certainly been seen as more of a viable challenger this year. What is your take on this race? On Mike's been there a long time.
Sure.
What is your take on how this thing could go?
So after the Sarah Innamorato Summerlee races that took out longtime incumbents, I don't take anything for granted. So I go into every race like that where you have a really progressive challenger coming in, and I always take it seriously and really just evaluate on the candidate and the campaign they're running. So Mike Doyle's been there a long time. There's an argument that people do make for that. I'm going to disagree with that argument for a number of reasons, that it's time for him to go. I disagree with that, especially in this time. I like Mike's seniority, and I like how he uses it as a leader, and damn do we need it. Jerry Dickinson is using a very standard progressive attack line on Mike. He's also saying that Mike's never had an opponent, which is not true.
Correct.
That is very dismissive of Dr. Janice Brooks, who has run against Mike a number of times. She hasn't done extremely well. She didn't have a lot of money, but they ran, good campaigns against each other, very respectful. And I think it was a little off-putting to hear Jerry say, well, he's never had, opposition. Well, no, we're not going to dismiss a black woman candidate who was doing that before it was popular to do it. So that was a little off-putting for me. He also is campaigning on we need more diversity, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But it's really hard to keep your progressive street cred up saying we need more black candidates, we need more women candidates, when you're throwing a black woman off the ballot. Right. He has filed a petition challenge against Dr. Janice Brooks, and that was interesting to me. And in the interview I did with Mike Doyle, I did ask him, did you ever throw Janice Brooks off the ballot? You have the money, you have the infrastructure, every lawyer in town. Did you do that? And he said, it never even occurred to me to do that. And that's the difference. Right. That's a statesman. So that's sort of how that played out after I interviewed them.
But there is something to be said, I think, and I'm not at all denigrating Janice Brooks' challenge to Mike Doyle in the past, especially after maybe the first time. I'm sure Mike had a feel for, is it really worth the publicity for me, or worth maybe the black eye I might get for this to try and challenge her candidacy. And the one thing that I think that Dickinson has been saying that I think is resonating with folks is that this is a seat that's nenever going red. I mean, without gerrymandering in some part of West Virginia, this seat is never going red. So I think he's very much saying that Doyle should be stepping out more, using it more of a bully pulpit to help really on national issues. And I think that he does have a point that Doyle, up until the last, couple of years, and really on some issues of women's reproductive health, he has been wrong up until this year. So I do think that Dickinson's challenge has forced Doyle to re-examine some of his positions, and and then just again talking about his his representation, his and I can honestly say that Mike Doyle gets elected by large margins every time. So it's hard for
Absolutely.
me to say that, that black voters are unhappy with how Mike Doyle has been doing the job.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that's something obviously that he's going to be pushing. Do you think it's going to be a competitive race? No. You think it's going to be?
I don't see anything happening on Dickinson's side to show me that he understands the challenge of being an incumbent that's been in that long. He also, in the conversation that I had with him, it's very clear he doesn't understand the size of this race. And we saw that in the Zapala race. It's one thing to door knock your way through 55,000 voters in a state reps race like Sarah and Summer did,
right.
Where Summer, give her all the credit in the world, she registered 3,000 voters,
right.
and that was her margin. She literally went out and cherry-picked her margin and registered them.
Right.
It was brilliant. You can do that in a state reps race. It gets a little harder when you're in a state Senate race that's 250,000. Then you start climbing into a congressional race at 700, and then like a DA's race, it's 1.3 million. Right. When you were looking at Lisa Middleman and Teron Jenkins talking about door knocking their way through this, and we talked about that when we were on the air in November. It's just not going to happen. I don't care what kind of volunteer army you have. It's not going to happen. And Jerry Dickinson's first finance report was actually really impressive. It was methodical. It showed progressive growth. You saw bigger checks. You saw more as it went on. And that, to me, says this is somebody that has a really, really good finance program. And then it just dropped off after that. So he had a really good initial run in his first quarter that was scary. It really was scary for an incumbent. There's no doubt that was announcing your presence with authority, but it just went away. And now he's sort of going with a really grassroots-based, progressive messaging. A lot of what he's talking about is state policy. It's not federal. So it just seemed a little disoriented to me. So, no, I don't see anything about this that is a big threat yet.
We're going to take a look at your interview with Jerry Dickinson, and we will be back in a few minutes.
Okay, so we're here with Democratic congressional candidate for the 18th congressional district here in Pittsburgh, Jerry. Nice to see you. How are you?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. So, first question, right out of the gate, why are you running?
Yeah, well, it's the time in American politics of chaos and crisis down there in Washington D.C. Ever since President Trump came into office, and so that's a huge part of why we need new, bold, progressive voices in Congress right now, is to fight back against that right-wing radicalism of the Republican Party. But then also too, on a more personal level, look, I'm a father. Parenthood has made me think future-minded, right? So I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and I say to myself, she's growing up in the Pittsburgh area in this region as a young black girl. And with the pollution and the issues that are going on with the climate change crisis, I want to be able to be on the front lines making change, right? Pushing progressive policies so that we can get to a carbon-free economy, so that people like my daughter, thousands and millions of children like my daughter in this part of the country, have a clean, safe environment to live in. And that's really important to me.
Okay. So you've talked a lot about being a progressive candidate. That is your thing. That's what you're running on.
Yeah, sure.
Is that safe to say?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
All right. So talk to me about progressive. Talk to me, and you're running against a longtime Congressman Mike Doyle. So talk to me a little bit about, in your contrast to him, why you're so much more progressive, and a little bit about his record and why you think you're going to be better at this.
Sure. There's a number of things. When we're talking about being a true progressive, that means that you're not taking corporate money. Okay. That means that you're not someone who's going to be cashing big checks from major fossil fuel industry companies, right? Multi-billion-dollar, multi-million-dollar companies that Mr. Doyle has been essentially doing the bidding for down there in Washington, D.C. And, you don't have to have the legal definition of corruption to say it's corruption, right, down there in Washington, D.C., when corporations are influencing the political process. So that's a huge distinction. We're not taking any corporate PAC money at all. We've raised over $200,000 just in individual contributions, and we're running a grassroots campaign, and that's what this is all about. So that's a huge distinction. Also, with regards to being a true progressive, is someone who is going to be on the front lines with regards to women's reproductive rights. Right, Mr. Doyle has an unfortunate history with regards to his voting record on women's reproductive rights, and in a district like this, which is safe blue, you need to have a true progressive on the front lines. The Green New Deal. Climate change. I am a strong supporter of the Green New Deal. I want to be on the front lines moving our fossil fuel industry to a solar and wind industry so that we can have a clean manufacturing industry so that families who are benefiting from the fossil fuel industry can still have jobs, permanent jobs, right? Thousands of permanent jobs in this new economy. So those are just a few of the major distinctions that we have between Mr. Doyle and I, and it's a clear contrast between a true progressive, right, and someone who's really just passively progressive at the end of the day.
Okay, so if I were to push back on that from somebody who lives a little bit outside the city and sort of sees it from a different perspective, but one of the issues that we've seen with solar and wind development is a lot of times we don't have the funding to support those. China is nationalizing those industries. They are putting massive influx of money, trillions of dollars to develop those industries there. We simply cannot compete because we don't have a nationalized energy infrastructure that is subsidized by government tax dollars. And what we've seen even with the Obama administration and Solyndra, they're putting trickle financing into things like Solyndra, and he still got destroyed because he put government money into that. And then, of course, those companies fail. The Chinese come, they get our technology, they take it overseas, and they kick our butts on that technology. So you're criticizing Congressman Doyle and the energy industry for playing in this game. But the question is, if you completely nix that process, how am I going to heat my home if we don't have a real infrastructure for alternative energy designed yet?
Sure. So one of the problems that we see right now with regards to the fossil fuel industry is that Congress has been subsidizing those industries for decades. Right? Millions of dollars, if not billions, over the years. And those subsidies obviously help to incentivize those industries to continue to produce. And so what congressmen and women are doing is they are incentivizing this process when they're not actually putting those same federal dollars, those subsidies, into wind and solar industries, which they could be doing. And so in other words, it's actually shifting those subsidies in a way, cutting those subsidies off to the fossil fuel industry and then reworking them and reshifting them to solar and wind in a way that will help produce the kind of clean energy and clean environment that we want, but at the same time produce thousands of jobs, right? So we look at New York, for example, and other areas of the country where they've shifted to wind and solar, and they have 70, 80,000 jobs, right, that are permanent, by the way, right? We talk about cracker plants, right, coming into this industry, into this region, and only producing maybe 2,000 temporary jobs, and then at the end of the day, when all is said and done, you're talking about 400 permanent jobs, right? So we're really, this question about climate change and what it can do to help the environment, but then also jobs, it's a false dichotomy, right? We should be talking about both, and so that we can help to influence and enhance the lives of those families who are in the fossil fuel industry to actually have an opportunity to have permanent jobs.
But the policy you're talking about with the cracker plant, that's a state policy. That's not actually federal funds. A lot of what you're describing is state level policy, and what we're doing, like with the current bill, 1100 that we're seeing at the state. So the question is how is that? Because it's a lot harder to impact that change at a federal level than it is state.
That's right. Well, that's why we need congresspersons who are big and bold and can be spokespersons, right? And actually be in Washington, D.C. to help bring money and subsidize money into the district to help build a solar and wind industry, because we have the technology here in Pittsburgh. We have the universities to do it. It just takes a change in leadership, a change in leadership style, and someone who's going to buck the trend and say, look, we're not going to be influenced by fossil fuel anymore. And, I've taken a stance against fracking, right, to ban fracking at the federal level, and oftentimes states will typically follow suit along with that ban, or the federal government, of course, can commandeer the states to ban it as well. And so, and as a law professor, constitutional law professor, I'm happy to jump into those debates and to figure out innovative ways to actually make this work and make this happen. Just takes a change in leadership.
Yeah, and a lot of time to shift us from one type of fuel source to another. So
Sure, exactly.
I think that's going to be quite a transition.
Yeah, of course, and nothing happens overnight. Oftentimes we want instantaneous gratification, right, in American politics, and that's not always the case. But we do need smart people who are willing to be bold and figure out ways to get there and to execute it. And I'm at the stage of my career and my life where I'm ready to do that.
Okay. So another thing that's been real big in Pennsylvania that we've seen, and we've definitely seen the progressive base really go after Betsy DeVos on education. She was probably one of the least popular picks Donald Trump had for a cabinet cabinet,
Sure.
and has been eviscerated for some of her education views. What is your view on education policy, everything from vouchers, charter schools, those kind of things,
Sure.
and how we're subsidizing education and
Sure.
producing education better?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am a public school educated person myself. I came up out of the foster care system here in Allegheny County and grew up in a large foster home in Shaler Township. So I graduated from Shaler, and so I'm someone who has benefited from the public school system. And my wife, Emily Dickinson, is a, yes, I know,
That's
Emily
awesome.
Dickinson.
I love it.
And she's a teacher for the deaf at Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. And so education is a huge part of our lives, right? And our daughters growing up in a household with educators. My big push is that we put as many resources as we can into revitalizing our public school education system. It's extremely important, particularly here in Western Pennsylvania. We know that there is de facto segregation based off of the property tax system, and we know that schools are funded through that system at the state level. And that, of course, has created major disparities in the resources that actually go into our public schools. And so one thing that I think from a congressional standpoint that I can do as a future congressman is to find ways to bring more federal dollars into the public school system here in Pennsylvania so that we can bring equity, right? I'm all about equitable educational opportunities for folks, and in particularly in low-income minority neighborhoods, right, and communities throughout Western Pennsylvania. There's a stark contrast in educational opportunities and results in terms of testing, in terms of actually academic excellence, a clear disparity in predominantly African-American neighborhoods and white neighborhoods. And so I'm someone who's certainly understanding of that and want to be able to play a role as a spokesperson for that here in Western Pennsylvania. The voucher charter school debate is, it's raging, right? And it's only been, Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration have only made that debate, I think, even worse, right, in terms of what's happening. The one thing is that, there are the pros and cons to vouchers and to charter schools. And one area I think that is a pro is that, you are able to get outstanding students from school systems that are lacking in the resources, right? Many of them being in African-American neighborhoods. And you are able to get some of those kids to transition to perhaps a better school system. So it's one of those things where it's a bit of a Band-Aid while we try and help fix this broader problem of the public education system here in Western Pennsylvania. And I think, having a congressperson who can talk about those issues and be an advocate is a good thing.
Okay. So you mentioned that the congressman hasn't had a challenger. He did have a challenger, Janice Brooks, who's run against him a number of times and actually performed surprisingly well. A lot of us were surprised to see how well she did against him, considering her lack of resources. But she is in this race, I understand. She
has filed she's certainly filed her petitions to get onto the ballot, although that is currently in dispute right now.
So you actually filed the petition challenge. You as the objector,
I did.
Correct?
That's right.
Okay, so what? So I have to ask on your progressive street cred. You mentioned earlier having a young daughter of color and needing more diversity in our Congress. One of your first acts once you get on the ballot is to throw a woman of color off the ballot in a lawsuit that you filed on your own. I'm just curious, how do you navigate that?
Sure. Well, when you take a look at the petitions, I'm a lawyer. I'm someone who is about the law, due process, following the rules and the procedures which you have to walk through in order to get onto the ballot, right? And I teach my law students this, and I did this as a lawyer, right? And when you take a look at those petitions, there are clear violations of the rules and procedures for actually getting onto the ballot.
And what are those? What's the bulk of the violations?
Yeah, so there's violations of authenticity with regards to the actual signatures on the lines, and that is a problem. Over 700. Okay, and so when we're talking about democracy, when we're talking about holding elected officials and candidates accountable to the people, it is a disservice for anyone to be filing fraudulent petitions.
Well, we will find out this April if the voters of the 18th Congressional District agree with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down. Jerry Dickinson, candidate for Congress. Take care.
Thank you.
Every time Jake points at me, I laugh. That was Erin's interview with Jerry Dickinson, congressional candidate in District 18. One of the things that it's time to get up. I just heard an alarm. One of the things that Jerry talks about a lot, and one of the things I think that he and Mike Doyle, they're both have environmental policy, but Green New Deal is where Dickinson stands, and Mike Doyle is with the manifesto that nobody remembers the name of, the long something for the green future of the American people.
Yeah, he actually has a bill.
The bill,
like
right?
a
Yeah,
law.
right.
Does things.
Right.
Unlike the Green New Deal, which is the manifesto, it's just an aspirational document. And so Jerry Dickinson has made his campaign largely about energy. And it's an interesting strategy because there's arguments to both sides as we're having this argument on fracking and what energy looks like moving forward. I don't think anybody is denying where we need to go. It's how we get there that we're really battling and beating each other up over. You have the building trades who are really aggressively acting on behalf of gas companies at this point, fighting extraction taxes and any type of regulation, which is fascinating for me because I was just talking to the mine workers and I saw an old piece where in 1975 they advocated for an extraction tax on coal companies.
Right.
And that money would go back into the communities to pay for playgrounds and community centers. And that was their way of doing restitution for any damage that the work that they were doing did to the community. So I saw that and I was like, wow, they did that back in 1975. How amazing.
Right.
And that's just not what we're seeing now. So there's the one argument where the trades, the gas companies are saying we just want to frack and frack and frack and consequences be damned. We're not worried about the environment because it's either jobs or bust. On the other side, you have the environmentalists that want a ban on fracking, but there's absolutely no infrastructure in place to power my gas stove or my gas furnace if we stop using gas.
Right.
So we have this chasm between those two ideologies, and both sides are sort of all over the place on this, and they're not even close to meeting in the middle. Right. I would love to see a federal policy. I'd love to see both the congressional candidates, Connor Lamb, just pounding away on why we need an infrastructure bill. I mean, we absolutely have an infrastructure bill. We're talking about areas of Pennsylvania where people are fracking in their backyard and it's affecting their water supply because they have well and septic. I mean, we're talking about water lines in the city of Pittsburgh. These are people that don't have water lines. And why are we not talking about a massive infrastructure bill to replace old pipes and to put pipes in place where there are none? So the infrastructure that's damaged by fracking in those areas does not affect their water because they have a public water source. So there's a lot we need to talk about there. And I'm not getting either side, really.
Right.
The other problem we have with alternative energy is, so everybody remembers Solyndra when Obama was in office. It was a solar company. And we can't compete with China on energy and solar because they nationalized their new industries. So they chose to put trillions and trillions, literally exponential amounts of money into nationalizing development of solar and wind.
Right.
And what happened to companies like Solyndra as our government tried to compete, but you can't nationalize a private industry in the United States. That's socialism.
Right.
We don't do that, even though that's what we would have to do to compete. So what happened was all of these solar companies went under because they couldn't compete. The Chinese came in and bought them, took their intellectual property, moved it to China, and now the bulk of our solar infrastructure is being produced there. So even if, let's say, we ban fracking, we don't have those jobs anymore, it's not a thing, and we do move to solar and wind, the bulk of that's being produced overseas. So we're doing double the damage. Right. So we have to come up with a way to nationalize energy development here in an alternative way. And the only way I can see you doing that is doing it under DOD. So the Department of Defense in 2015 did a report saying that climate change was the #1 greatest national security threat in this country. In the past, when DoD has done extensive research and development on anything, specifically the Intel Pentium processor in my iPhone. So the phone is produced in another country, but the processor in it is the third leading export of the United States, produced here. Why? Because when the defense contractors felt that property, that intellectual property, was being threatened by competition in China, they really fought to protect it, went to the WTO, swung a baseball bat, and to this day, we've had that protected. The only way we're going to really get solar infrastructure to develop at the rate we need, with the astronomical infusion of money for R&D that we're going to need to get it to the level that we can implement it daily in our communities, is by putting it under DoD and, high-speed development, and putting the massive amounts of money it's going to take. We're not going to be able to compete with the Chinese. We're just not. The way capitalism works, we're going to fall short, because they're just going to flood that with money, and there's no way to keep up with it. So that is a very serious conversation that we have, and we are way too far apart on both sides. And I do think that Mike Doyle's climate bill is really good. It's step by step. It's cutting fossil fuel emissions. It's cutting particle emissions. It has a goal, and it's being recommended by climate change scientists. So he's moving in the right direction with actual policy, where Jerry Dickinson is staying on the far left, saying we're going to ban fracking, we're going to do this, but there's no solution in the middle that he's offering whatsoever that's even reasonable.
And I do want to say that I made up a name earlier because I really couldn't remember, but it's the Growing Renewable Energy and Efficiency Now Act, and that was what Bill Peduto talked about earlier, is one of his concerns and why he favored. And I asked him, I said, what do you make of the Green Act? And he basically said, I don't know if anybody's read the entire thing, but he's read the summary. But what he likes
Doyle's Act or the Green New Deal?
No, the Doyle's Act.
Doyle's Act.
Growing
Okay.
Renewable. I guess it spells out green also.
Oh, okay.
Green Act. Maybe I'll remember it now. But he said that the problem is it's making sure that those jobs you're losing, you just can't, and that's why it's hard to sell that to the areas that we've been talking about tonight, is because you're not just talking about cleaning up our air or cleaning up the environment. To those people, you're saying, I'm going to take your job. And so that's what Bill Peduto says is, look, we got to find something that, a way to replace those jobs. And so that is in this.
That would be an
act.
infrastructure
Correct,
bill.
yes.
That would be an infrastructure bill. And if you are an environmentalist, you should be screaming at Congress and laughing at Donald Trump's infrastructure bill, which was a disgrace, and saying, let's stop building frack wells, let's stop building pipelines, and let's start building water lines. I mean, that's the solution there. You want to do this, that's the way you do it.
We're getting ready. We'll go to your interview with Mike Doyle, but just kind of set up a little bit your conversation with him. Do you get the sense that he's taking his challengers seriously, or because I mean, again, we've all seen we've all seen these races where. And there has been a change, because we have seen candidates who weren't given a shot come back and win. But we've also, doing this a while now, I've also seen those candidates. I've also seen the Les Ludwigs of the world who run their campaigns and, it really amounts to nothing. So, but do you think Doyle is taking this challenge seriously?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He very early on. And I had talked to him about the finance report that Jerry had, like we talked about his first quarter, that was very impressive. And I said, this is not a joke. And he said, I agree. So he took it very seriously. He hired staff. He's campaigning. He's talking about his record. I mean, I interviewed him. And I mean, even if I wanted to light up Mike Doyle and something, I mean, come on. The man's been doing this 20 years. You're not going to stump Mike Doyle. But I think he's really, really on message. He really knows what he wants to say. He knows what he's fighting. And he's a fire and brimstone candidate. Yeah. The first time I ever saw him speak, I watched him get in somebody's face, really, really defending Nancy Pelosi. And so I've always had a lot of respect for him. That said, you don't take any challenger lightly. And, and after Dom and Paul Costa, nobody does. Right.
And I do think he made a mistake when Dickinson came out and Dickinson came out as a candidate. Mike basically just shined it off. He basically just said, oh, I guess there's a couple. I don't really have a challenger. Maybe there's a couple people running. And so I think that pumped energy into, I think, that early fundraising, but it also, I think, sort of pumped that energy into Jerry Dickinson and continuing running for the seat. So we will take you now to Erin's interview with Congressman Mike Doyle.
So we're here with Mike Doyle, Congressman of the 18th Congressional District, right here in Allegheny County. How are you, Congressman?
I'm good. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. So talk to me. How's Washington treating us these days?
What's the old Chinese curse? May you live in interesting times. We are.
To say the least.
Yeah.
To say the least. You have a campaign this year, every 2 years.
Every two years, whether I like it or not.
Yeah, and you typically have an opponent. That's no different this year.
Yeah.
How's that looking this year?
I approach it pretty much the same. I've had primary opponents, I think, the last 5 elections in a row.
Yeah.
I try to control the things I can control, and that's my work ethic and my record of representing the people in the 18th District. I think if I reflect their needs and their concerns and that we have an office that provides good service to people, people generally reward that. And that's what we're doing this year, not much different than any other year.
So we spoke to one of your opponents, and he talked a lot about progressive leadership, and that's obviously an expanding thing after Trump. We've seen, a big outburst of progressive activism. How do you respond to the insinuation that we need somebody more progressive than you in your seat?
Well, this district has a progressive congressman. I think my record reflects that, and every organization that puts out ratings on those types of things, I'm at the very top. Not only in the state, but amongst the United States Congress. So this district, as I said, has a progressive congressman, and I have a record to prove it.
Mm-hmm. So along that lines, one of the things that is in the race that you're in, the conversation that keeps coming up is the environment and climate. Do you want to talk and answer some of the charges that have been leveraged against you regarding that you're not good enough on this? How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm the only one, to my knowledge, that is actually backing actual legislation to deal with climate change. The Clean Futures Act, which is a 638-page draft, which is about to be put into legislative form, follows the recommendations of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is the gold standard of climate scientists saying what we have to do to keep the temperature from warming 1.5 degrees Celsius from post-industrial age. This bill follows that to the T. I'm the only candidate supporting that. The document that my opponents talks about isn't a bill, it's a non-binding resolution. It doesn't provide an action plan. It doesn't get us started on the path with dealing with climate change. So if he's interested and serious about climate change, he would be reading, first of all, the Clean Futures Act and supporting it, because this is real legislation that addresses the problem.
Unlike the New Green Deal, which is basically a manifesto saying this is what we want, but we have no pathway to get there for the most part.
It's an aspirational document,
Sure.
but it's not an action plan. It doesn't prescribe in any detail how you would get there. It talks about wanting to reach certain goals by certain dates, but it isn't prescriptive. And any document, whether it's a resolution for it to be real, it has to be translated into legislation. I'm a legislator. People running against me are running to be legislators. That means we pass laws that hopefully reach the desired effect of what the laws are intended to do. I wrote the last climate change bill in the Energy and Commerce Committee along with my colleagues. Jay Inslee and I, during the cap and trade debate, wrote the key amendment to get that bill out of committee. So I'm no stranger to climate change legislation. 10 years ago, the last time a piece of climate legislation passed the House of Representatives, it was from the committee that I work on, and I had a big part in it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when we're running on a platform of we need more people of color, we need more women, we need more diversity, and the next thing you see is a petition challenge throwing a black woman off the ballot. Have you ever initiated a petition challenge against Janice Brooks?
No, and I believe this is the 5th time Dr. Brooks is running in the Democratic primary. It would never occur to me to try to throw her off the ballot. She has a right to run, and I've always felt that that's good for democracy. Mm-hmm. And, we've engaged one another, and Dr. Brooks has been a good candidate, and I hope that she stays on the ballot this time, too.
Okay. Along the lines of identity politics, civil rights, one of the things that I've always found interesting that you seem to keep close to your heart was the issue of guns. And in April of 1999, we had the Columbine shooting. For somebody like me who had a child after that year, we realized that we're bringing a child into a world that is very different than the one we had before. Mass shootings are now a reality. Take us to June of 2016. We have the Orlando nightclub shooting. You, your colleagues, and of course the great civil rights leader, John Lewis, want gun legislation. Lead a sit-in. They shut down Congress. Paul Ryan, sends it into recess. They shut the cameras off. You're all live streaming from your cell phones. It was an amazing civil rights moment in this country. Can you talk a little bit about that and how your position on guns has moved forward since that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I carry an F- rating from the NRA, which I wear as a badge of courage. I think what happened was a lot of us just got so sick and tired of doing thoughts and prayers on the House floor every time there was a tragedy. The Speaker would call the House to order and say, let's have a moment of silence for the victims. But then we did nothing to address the problem. And we were becoming frustrated that we couldn't get any legislation in the House of Representatives. So we come up with an old-fashioned idea from the 70s, and basically John Lewis and I and a couple others said, let's stage a sit-in. And we talked to some of the newer members, and some of them said, what's a sit-in? And I said, we're going to go into the well of the House of Representatives, and we're just going to shut this place down. We're going to sit in. And you're right, they recessed the Congress, and then they shut the cameras off so that C-SPAN couldn't cover it. And that's when some of our newer members started live streaming the event. But we wanted to draw attention to the fact that Congress hasn't been acting. Now, Democrats took back the Congress in the last session. We passed two pieces of gun legislation, one that closed the Charleston loophole and one on background checks. Those bills passed last February out of the House of Representatives, and they have sat in the Senate graveyard ever since. In fact, I think it's important for people to know we have passed, Democrats in the House, 400 bills out of the House of Representatives. 276 of them are bipartisan, and they sit over there in the Senate without action because it's the Senate Republicans that aren't doing anything, not the House Democrats.
So along the lines of being a legislator, being in leadership, can you talk about any of the committee work that you're doing that would be of interest? Yeah,
one of the big things is on prescription drugs. We're the only country in the free world that doesn't negotiate for better prices for our prescription drugs. As a result, Americans are paying on things like insulin 10 times more for insulin than our neighbors up in Canada are paying. This isn't magic insulin or super insulin in the United States. It's the same insulin that people in Canada and every other country around the world are getting for 1/10 the price. We believe that we should be able to negotiate for better prices. The federal government spends this is federal taxpayer money. A third of the research that gets done on pharmaceutical drugs is done with federal dollars. The pharmaceutical industry spends more on advertising than they do on research. Yet they would have you believe that if we would negotiate prices with them, that somehow none of this research would be done and no new drugs would come to the market. It's simply not true. We passed H.R. 3 out of the Energy and Commerce Committee that I serve on, and again on the floor of the House of Representatives. And again, it sits over in the Senate without action. If people want to see lower drug prices, the Senate needs to act on H.R. 3. That's a very important piece of legislation. I chair Communications and Technology in the Energy and Commerce Committee. We passed the net neutrality bill to save the internet. We believe that the internet should be an open and free source of information back and forth. These ISPs, they control the on-ramp to the internet. They set the terms and conditions. They tell you how much you have to pay. People pay almost the equivalent of car payments to get internet service on their phones and at their houses. And we want to make sure that they're not able to block content from competitors, that they don't exhibit anti-competitive behavior. We passed that bill because the Trump FCC did away with those rules. Passed the House of Representatives, sits over in Mitch McConnell's graveyard. So a lot of bills have come out of our committee that have addressed a lot of consumer problems. Robocalls, that's the bill that finally made it through the Senate and got signed by the President. That come out of my committee. 60 billion robocalls this year in the United States, 80% of them illegal. We have now stopped the practice, or the cellular companies are being mandated to put blocking technology in people's cell phones free of charge. unless people opt out. Now, if somebody wants robocalls, they can say, don't block my service.
They're really interested in those.
Yeah, but there's not many of those. That bill did pass the Senate, and the president did sign it. So that's one bill come out of my committee that I was the sponsor of that's actually become law. And then finally, the Autism Reauthorization Act. This is something near and dear to my heart. I founded the Autism Caucus in Congress 21 years ago. We have reauthorized autism funding for another 5 years so that families can get services, so that their kids that are aging out of treatment because they're over 21 years old will have access to services. This is a very important bill for a lot of families in the United States, something near and dear to my heart. We passed it out of the House and the Senate, and the President signed it. So those are two of my prime sponsored bills that are actually law today.
Wow. I wasn't aware of that, and as somebody that worked in mental health and dealt a lot with adult autism, I saw a lot of people that didn't have any services because there just wasn't any available. So that's awesome. Last thing, I spent years of my life with Jack Murtha as my congressman. You are not just, he was the dean of your delegation for a long time. You are not just the congressman here in Allegheny County, but you're a political leader. You're a voice. How do you look at your role as leading not just Allegheny County, but the people of Pennsylvania, and not just focusing on the voters where you live, but everybody in the Commonwealth, and making sure that we're moving forward, making sure the party is moving forward, especially now in the time that we're in?
Yeah, one of the things I remember the most when I first got to Congress, Jack Murtha was one of my mentors, and he sat down with me and he talked about how the House of Representatives is very committee-driven, that you need to decide, what committee you want to serve on and how that best serves your district, and that sometimes the committee you want to be on, you don't get on as a freshman, but you have to work towards it. I've tried to be a mentor to new members in our delegation. We have basically 5 new members of Congress in the delegation, 4 women in southeastern Pennsylvania, dynamic women that are freshmen, and then Connor Lamb, who's sort of like a freshman and a half because he come in on a special election. And one of the things that I've worked very hard on is to make sure they get good committee assignments, that Pennsylvania has balanced representation on all the committees, so that that's good for our state. And to make sure that, to the extent that I can help them be effective, not only in how they govern and how they do their jobs. And I believe that our delegation's made great strides in the last couple of years at the ballot box, too, as we're electing more and more Democrats. And my goal is to see more Democrats elected in this upcoming election, and to make sure that Pennsylvania is a blue state come November. And that's going to be very important.
Yeah, and it's definitely a big climb. We've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you. And congratulations on your service and all the amazing things you've done. Good luck in this election.
Thanks.
Well, welcome back to the Pittsburgh Current Super Tuesday Live. And we actually do have some breaking news. We're going to go to the breaking news desk right now.
Live from the breaking news desk, I would like to remind everyone following along tonight that Senator Elizabeth Warren is indeed still in the race. So please, can we stop with the Biden and Sanders comparison? Senator Elizabeth Warren is still in the race.
Of course, we have here as our guest Bethany Hallam, Allegheny County Councilperson Bethany Hallam, and one of 6 people still holding events for Elizabeth Warren in the county. Just kidding. We're going to get into all that.
Hey, she's all in. To what, I don't know, but she's
You
in.
are all in. She's both feet and 2 hands and whatever else. She's in. Bethany Hallam, how are you on this Super Tuesday? Are you feeling super?
I'm feeling super duper.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about all night was the mess with the Allegheny County Democratic Committee, something that you have been involved
I'm not
in
familiar. Oh my gosh.
for quite some time. You kind of know what's going on with that.
I'm not familiar with this. Can you update me?
Yeah, there was this county councilwoman who sat outside the door of a press conference.
Why?
And she was taping it because she wasn't allowed inside.
Oh.
And but anyway, how do you feel how do you feel things have progressed since that time of the press conference and that meeting in which the nomination of the endorsement of Heather Cass was it was kind of approved by Eileen Kelly, the Democratic committee chairperson. What sort of happened since then?
Well, now that you've reminded me about what's been going on. So a lot has happened since that fateful day of the press conference at the ACDC offices, which, by the way, was Chairwoman Eileen Kelly. City Councilman Anthony Coghill was present as well. And I think it's very important that we do not forget that part of it as well. But a lot has happened. The chairwoman put out a statement after that, not apologizing to myself or Representative Summer Lee or candidate Jessica Benham, but just saying basically that we need to have a bylaws convention, that we need to have a full countywide committee meeting, which, by the way, is something that I've been calling for since July.
Right.
So, I guess if this is what it takes to make something happen, then this is what it takes. But I think that the narrative has kind of switched to the people who have alienated the party by supporting a non-incumbent against our first Black female representative in Harrisburg from Western Pennsylvania. I think the narrative has switched from the fact that, okay, maybe we have a few issues within the ACDC that we need to address, but instead has come upon this broader issue that we actually have Trump supporters, not just within the Democratic Party, but within the Allegheny County Democratic Committee. Some of them are elected officials. But it's important that we're talking about all the symptoms of the larger problem.
Right.
And it's not just the chairwoman who's the problem. This was a problem that started long before she was the chairwoman. And if we don't do something now to address it, I'm afraid it will continue long after her tenure.
I do want to point out, though, that these aren't new problems.
No.
And these are things that no one has really – everyone knows it's a problem. They see clearly that it's a problem. But no one has ever really wanted to address it. They've just kind of let it go. And one thing, the interview tomorrow, the rest of my interview with Bill Peduto will be online. And one of the things he talked about is was he also has been calling, because he was never a fan of the the Democratic Committee until he actually became mayor. And so I think a lot of people are sort of calling for the endorsement procedure to end. Is that something that you would like to see, or do you think an overhaul is necessary?
I think an overhaul is necessary.
Yeah.
I don't think it's incumbent upon me as one single committee member in Allegheny County to decide the direction which the committee goes on from here. I think it's important to remember that I won countywide against the endorsement of the ACDC, that Sarah Lee and Summer Innamorato won against the ACDC endorsement, that Chelsea Wagner won against the ACDC endorsement. So I think the bigger question here is the endorsement relevant until we address the larger problem at hand? And that is that a lot of the current committee members on the Allegheny County Democratic Committee are not reflective of the communities that they're supposed to represent. So I think that's the bigger problem here, and we can't just address one tiny problem without addressing the entire situation without a complete overhaul.
It's gone on. It really has gone on forever. I mean, it's 1997 when City Councilman Bruce Krause, when he ran.
I was 8 years old, so I don't really remember that. But
You don't?
Let me think. I don't know how old I was. I was definitely covering at the time. But again, back then there were several seats open. Bruce Krause, Patrick Dowd, and even Ricky Burgess at the time. These are people who didn't get the committee support, but they won anyway. So it's been going on for quite a while. And so I think certainly that it's time for a change.
I think that a big difference between now and then is that right now we have a lot of prominent elected officials who are calling for reform of the ACDC, along with the progressive wing of the party. So I think that that's where you see this kind of weird alliance of people that you never thought would come together for the same cause. And so I think that that's really important. I think the other thing that's important to notice is why now?
Yeah.
Right? Is it because you're at the end of the year term? Is it because you feel like you have nothing to lose now? Now you're an incumbent.
Right.
So I think, no shade thrown on any of our elected officials who have called for reform of the committee, because I truly wholeheartedly appreciate that support. But I think the motives behind all of these public statements that have been made need to be examined.
Yeah, I think really it's going to be folks like you who bring these things, who publicly expose these things to the public so everyone can kind of see what's going on underneath the sort of party machine. I think that's going to be eventually what's going to bring change.
At the end of the day, the people of our county get to vote.
Right.
So I would love to see a committee that is representative of those people, because when you see time and time again the endorsement not having the value that it used to have, that presents the problem in itself. The Trump supporters is one thing, but we have a lot of committee members who are super hard workers. We have entire committees who dedicate their entire lives to making sure that good Democrats get elected, but we have a lot of committee members who are just complacent. They show up to vote on endorsement day, maybe. Do they knock doors for candidates? Maybe. Do they host house parties? Do they donate to the candidates? Do they do anything to advance the cause of the Democratic Party? Maybe. If they don't, then it is our responsibility as community members to step up to the call and run for the seats of the committee.
Do you think one of the other things I want to talk to you about, and it seems to have maybe died down a little bit, but in the 36th district where you have Jessica Benham was one of the candidates who's running to replace Harry Reid Shaw. That was sort of, we have Heather Cass, a story that we broke here at the Pittsburgh Current, a long history of not just pro-Trump public or social media, but also some really disgusting things for there's no other word to say it, about people on public assistance and addicts. And that, I think, is one of the things that really sort of, it took something like that to like bring this to light. Like, it took something that extreme to bring it to light.
Well, can I comment in on that?
Yeah,
like,
please.
particularly in that case.
Yeah.
So the committee is designed for the leadership, call their committee people. You know, I live in Frank Dermody's district. If Frank calls everybody and says, hey, I want you to support this person, they're going to support them because Frank asked and he's been loyal to them and they're loyal to him. In this case, everybody blew up Eileen. They blew up Heather Cass. Nobody has blown up Harry Reid Shaw.
Right.
Yeah.
He hand-selected her. That woman had no campaign, no infrastructure, no staff, no money. Yeah. She was handwriting her letters. I genuinely believe he plucked this young woman up, threw her to the wolves, and hung her out to dry. And I don't think she had the first clue what was about to happen. And then when this thing went nuts, she gets the endorsement. Now, by the way, every year, there's some crazy endorsement.
Sure.
There's always some.
Remember when they didn't endorse me?
I know, right?
That was nuts.
There's like a shit show. And
Someone's thirsty, folks.
oh, that was my product placement.
Right. I think that was the point. But this is
but why is Harry Reid Shaw accepting no responsibility? By the way, after Heather gets blown up on national news, because this went national, when the Labor Council comes out and says this is wrong, it goes national because everybody wants to know what Western Pennsylvania has to say in this cycle. Where was Harry Reid Shaw standing next to her saying, hey, I made this call, I picked her, I put her in this race, I asked these people to vote, and they voted the way I asked them. Nobody held him accountable for this decision. And he could have left gracefully and left and let the game play out and let Jessica Benham run. No, he wasn't going to do that. He put this person in, and I honestly believe she had no idea what she was getting into.
Sure.
And she got blown up and destroyed on a national level, but nobody was saying, wait a second. This was somebody that was not a politician. This was not a Politico. This wasn't even a committee member. She got thrown to the wolves, and nobody said a word about the fact that it was Harry Reid Shaw that did it. And all these people that asked for Eileen's resignation, of course, after a really bad press conference. But at the end of the day, hey, is anybody going to hold Harry Reid Shaw responsible for the disaster he made of our party and the embarrassment? No, nobody has. And he has not said one thing publicly, which is the biggest act of cowardice in this entire thing.
Right. I mean, even before Harry was a lame duck, I mean, he still avoided answering anything that even remotely, that he didn't feel like answering, regardless of his ass backwards opinions on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Except for labor, how was Harry Reid Shaw even a Democrat? Right. And so it really was this sort of weird thing. For him, it was business as usual. He left Heather Cash to hold the bag, and and the other person involved. And when I say that, I'm not sticking up for Heather Cash. I think that, like I said, that whole situation. I don't. Maybe she didn't know. Right. Maybe she didn't know what was coming, but she knew. Well, she knows who she is, I would think. I would assume. And so, but the other person that I think needs to, again, be taking a little more heat from this was the other side show at this press conference, and it's City Councilor Anthony Coghill. The day that we broke that story, I talked to Anthony on the telephone, in which he said, he was very repentant. I didn't know about this. I had no idea. I'm immediately withdrawing my support. Well, it turns out that
Make sure you see, like, for the record, that I rolled my eyes very hard.
for the record. Right.
Did you get a close up on that, Jake?
But to me, it seemed like, I mean, yeah, why? I mean, I assumed that Harry was going to answer a phone call too, but he answered, and he, it seemed to be like, I mean, why would you want to die on this hill? And then it turns out that not supporting someone doesn't mean what I think it means in English, which is I still support them, and I as much as he wants to say that he was not whipping votes for Heather Cass. I mean, there are others, there are witnesses, there are people who, whether it was whipping votes for Heather Cass or whipping up support for anyone but Jessica Benham, I think that's important. And again, I think that he's someone else, I think, who needs to answer for how he handled the entire situation. I mean, he really kind of stepped away from it at the beginning, but he chose to get back into it. And I think that goes back to, I mean, the political animal that he is. I mean, this is a guy who fought for his ward chairmanship for years to get control of this ward. So it's I think that there are a lot of people who are responsible for things like this happening.
So.
Yeah,
and that includes ward chairs who
Yeah.
have publicly supported Trump.
Right.
That includes committee members all around the county who any simple Facebook search shows their support for the opposing
Right.
party. If anybody is familiar with the Allegheny County Democratic Committee bylaws, there are currently bylaws in place that say if you supported a member of the opposing party, a candidate of the opposing party within the past 2 years, you are not allowed to serve on the Democratic
Right.
Committee. So we can talk about changing the bylaws all we want, but when we don't have leadership who is willing to enforce the current bylaws, what's
Right.
the point?
Yeah, and
What
that's
is the
what
point?
this was. This was a product of just failed leadership across the board.
Across the board.
And here, and I give Bethany, Lindsey Williams, and Councilman Krause
Sure.
all the credit. And my response was, profiles in courage are not written after the war is lost. They
Right.
are written as it's being fought,
Yeah.
before it's fought. So when this was publicly exposed, and I believe it was you guys that did it in January, Bethany, Councilman Krause, and Senator Williams were the only ones that
Yep.
came out and doubled down on Jessica Benham and said, no, we're not going to stand for
Right.
this. Where were all of these other profiles and courage that waited until after the disaster was created?
Right.
So as far as I was concerned, the only people that had the right to stand up and say, this is ridiculous, were those three people, because those were the ones that got in ahead and tried to do something about it.
We broke the story on January 20th, and then everyone started following. More and more stuff came out. The endorsement was on February 16th.
Right. Almost a month.
Nobody
Yeah.
did anything.
Don't say you didn't
Right,
know.
and nobody did
Yeah,
anything
we all
to try
knew.
and stop it.
Everyone
Everybody
knew.
knew.
It was very public. It was in the news. Everyone was talking about it, especially the people of District 36.
Yeah.
Everyone knew about this. So for anybody to claim, especially an elected official, especially an elected official that happens to also be a ward chair, and especially the chairwoman of the Allegheny County Democratic Committee, for anybody to claim that they did not know what this person stood for and who she was at her core, that's disgusting.
Right.
And regarding the supposed, she apologized. No, she didn't. Please, somebody, I
that's-
challenge anyone watching, show me where Heather Cass apologized for anything she said. Show me where, even without an apology, where she showed changed behavior, because that is the best apology, is changed behavior. And I have not seen that from her, from anybody on her side, from anybody who claims to excuse her actions and her words. I have not seen that from anyone.
And that's one of the things that came out when they said, number one, they said she apologized, and they said these were 5 years in the past. They weren't 5 years in the past. Some of them, of course, were 5 years.
Some of them were last year.
Yes, I mean there were posts from last year. One of her issues with needle exchange, and the one with the rainbow unicorn gun that also made fun of a gender identity. Those are from last year.
Yeah.
And another from last summer, I don't know, Jake, if you got that up, but in which she posted a photo of her husband. It was at some sort of local festival or fun day or some shit, and it was an inflatable gorilla, and he sticks his hand up the gorilla's pants and says, "I'm doing a Trump, and I'm grabbing her by the pussy." I mean, this is last August. These things came out, or that these things happened, and it's been now weeks since these things have come out, and it's amazing. And it's also kind of amazing to me that it's kind of died down a little bit too. And I think that eventually,
it's about to be revamped real soon, Charlie.
and I'm particularly
Bethany's
Let me
on
tell
it.
you,
Right.
I am on it. I've been on it, and I am on it.
the Heather Cass in particular, or the entire party thing?
The entire committee. Because that's the thing. And I also think it's very important to clarify for people that the Democratic Party and the Democratic Committee are not the same entity. The Democratic Committee are elected members of the Democratic Party who vow to serve the communities that they represent, right? So it's one thing, if you're a Democratic Party member who wants to vote for Trump, who wants to wear a MAGA hat in public, I fully support your First Amendment right to do so. Right. But when you are voted in, or in a lot of cases appointed, to represent your community in the Democratic Party in your neighborhood on the Allegheny County Democratic Committee, yes, I hold you to a higher standard. Yes, that is your job to follow the bylaws of the ACDC, right, to work your ass off to get Democrats elected up and down the ballot, not to get dinos elected, not to get Trump supporters elected, not to get Republicans elected, because newsflash, they have a whole ass committee and it's called the Republican Committee of Allegheny County. If that's what you want to do, go and join that committee, because you're not welcome in ours. And until our leadership is willing to hold people accountable who time and time again have violated the bylaws, have proven that they are not held to the same standard as the rest of the committee members, it's time to go.
And to Bethany's point, to this day, I've not heard that any of those committee people have been removed in any way, shape, or form.
They have not.
And
our leadership's MIA right now.
They need to be thrown off the committee.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is not Eileen's fault. Like, the committee people vote. It is not her role to interfere in that. And typically chairs don't. They let the committee people vote. The press conference was a disaster, and that excuse was not good. But now her first reaction after that happened is like, you're all gone.
Right.
Like, every one of you are gone.
The first thing I would do.
And if she would have done that after that happened,
score some points in my book.
Oh, everybody would have been like, yes. And this would have been over. And that's all she would have had to do, is said, you know what? I can't control who you vote for, but I certainly can throw your ass off after you do something like that.
Right. And really, that was the other message that day. It almost tried to come off like, well, my hands are tied. The committee has spoken. But, again, as we've said, there are many things that could be done. And again, with my interview tomorrow with Bill Bill Peduto, that's what he said. These people never should have been in this position to begin with.
Exactly.
It's a complete violation of the party bylaws.
Right.
The other thing I want to talk about really quickly, as we'll kind of wrap up this. I hope
it's not Joe Biden.
There's an election.
Please.
I put a picture of Joe Biden.
I saw that. I've been watching the pictures you've been posting on that screen since we've been on. Please say it's not that.
No, so one of the other major things from that meeting, of course, was that Allegheny County Chief Executive Rich Fitzgerald basically brought a candidate forward to challenge the incumbent Summer Lee, the only African American representative in the state house from this area, and he whips vote for a guy. He finds the candidate, brings him forward, and he kept whipping the votes. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm playing a prank on Bethany Hallam that I only wish
I'm trying to keep it together,
that I could share with the rest of you, but I can't.
I'm an elected official. I will keep my composure.
You're doing pretty well.
She's doing very well, considering.
Whip and whip and whip and whip and whip. That's a whole other different level of wrongness. What's happening in the Summer Lee race?
What's happening in this stage right now is a whole nother level of wrongness. But to speak to your point,
right.
I fault Chairwoman Eileen Kelly and City Councilman Anthony Coghill, because as soon as they held that press conference and they felt the need to call out myself and Representative Lee and Jessica Benham, they took all the attention away from our county executive, who was getting national press for publicly supporting the opponent of our first black female elected official in Harrisburg from Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
I mean, not just Allegheny County, from Western Pennsylvania. She is a historic candidate, a historic elected official. And the fact that we've had this narrative, I mean, I've been on the Democratic Committee for 5 going on 6 years now, and it's always been, we support incumbents. Even if you're the best candidate for the job, and we all agree to that, we support incumbents. That's what we do. And I've been super impressed with the Allegheny County House delegation, who has rallied around their incumbents, which is what the party always said that they do.
Right.
But all it took was County Executive Rich Fitzgerald's endorsement of Summer Lee's opponent, and suddenly that was a story for 4 40 minutes. And then all of a sudden it switched to, hey, the ACDC held this press conference and it's a huge dumpster fire. And now that's all we're going to talk about. So I fault them for that. I can't help but wonder if it was intentional to take the shade off of him and throw it on themselves, which, I mean, if that's something you're willing to lay down for.
Eileen's rebuke of Rich Fitzgerald, it actually made him, in some eyes, not mine certainly, but like sympathetic character, because people
Very
were
much so.
coming out
Very
and
much
sticking
so.
up for him.
Because she came for him too.
Yeah. And there was nobody. I mean, obviously, Rich can be a figure that can really stir some emotions up for a lot of people, but that was not the case here. Nobody empathized with her perspective that Rich Fitzgerald had anything to do with this. And even after the press conference, when they were talking about, you know, her withdrawing and things like that, Rich was the one that said, you know, this is a conversation we need to have. That was his tweet. He goes, there's some conversations that we need to have.
And all the people who have come out in support of me, which I really appreciate that, but like, where is that same love for Representative Summerly? Where is that same support? The person who's been out on the picket lines, multiple picket lines I've seen her at, where has her opponent been? But he's for the workers? I don't think so. When we talk about standing up for blue collar jobs and standing up for the workers of Allegheny County, because that's what we identify. That's who we are here in Allegheny County. Summerly has done it more so than almost any elected official I know. So to see the party not standing up for somebody who, to me, embodies the ideals of the Democratic Party more than so many other people, it's really a shame to me. And I think it makes myself and a lot of other people just reevaluate, where is the Democratic Party right now, right? The committee is one thing, but where is the Democratic Party right now that all of these insiders don't feel the need to come out in support of her?
Well, and in Summer's situation, and I understand what you're saying, I think that it was more, not so much the party, but it was more certain sects of labor that had issue with what was happening with the Clairton plant. That was a big issue, the notion that steel mills are put in places to exploit black community members. Those were the kind of comments that I think were very explosive and triggered the steelworkers, triggered the building trades. So that's where that came from. That's not the party, but there's no doubt that bled into what was happening. Yeah, that they're not always hand in hand. And really, there's people that argue that the Labor Council does what they do, that the party does what they do, and like sometimes we don't agree with them, sometimes they don't agree with us, and that's fine. In this particular case, there was a lot of crossover this year. Between those two machines deciding what they were going to do. There's no doubt about it. And that was difficult for a lot of people to navigate.
And I think it goes back to this bullshit narrative that we have, not just here in Allegheny County, but across the country, where you have to pick between supporting labor and good paying union jobs or the environment. That is not the case. I am so sick and tired of hearing that. And I think that it's incumbent upon us as elected officials and as, you know, people who generally identify as good Democrats to show that narrative is false, that you can have both. And that's the thing that a lot of people fail to realize. And they think that they have to pick one or the other. But in fact, we can have both. We can all coexist and we can have great paying union jobs. That's what this county was built on.
Sure. And we talked about that earlier, that those two, the idea that you're either jobs or you're not jobs, or you're environment or you're not environment, when we have literally no way in the middle to be one or the other. There has to be a continuum on both sides. And yes, it is incumbent upon the party to say, wait a second, we can't have all this and we can't have all that. We have got to find a way to work together in the middle and stop blowing each other to smithereens, completely annihilating what was the New Deal coalition, because I don't think we survive without it. I really do think it's an essential part of who we are, was that coalition. That's what built the Democratic Party as we know it today. And we are going through an identity crisis. We have younger voters coming in. My son is one of the most active Democrats I know. He's 19 years old. He's a Bernie supporter. He's running the Bernie supporters at his college. And I'm looking at him and I'm saying, all right, this is the next generation. How do I do what's best for him? Because it's about what he wants now. I already left him a worse generation than I got. It's too late. But I can help him and help navigate that. And this party has to look at itself and find a way to take these economic populist messages that really have some grounding. A lot of what Bernie is saying has grounding when we start talking about healthcare, when we start talking about economic justice, when we start talking about good union jobs moving us forward on infrastructure instead of just on energy. There is an argument to be had, but we are so far apart on this issue, and finding people that are willing to come to the middle on both sides has just been a true nightmare, as somebody that spends every day straddling this issue,
Right.
as a labor candidate who is a loyal Democrat, trying to straddle this and talk to, people on the labor side and get them to calm down and come to the table, on the environmental side, getting them to come down and come to the table and have the conversation we need to have, has just been a nightmare. And I need my elected officials to start leading on this, or we're not going to get anywhere.
And I think that's something that you mentioned in an earlier segment about the fact that, Representative Summer Lee registered 3,000
Yes, she did.
people who were non-voters, right? So when we talk about swing voters a lot, especially in context of the presidential election, everybody's talking about the independents and the, moderate Republicans. But in reality, those people are not swing voters. They are set where they are at, and that's the end of the story, in my opinion. What I think are the real swing voters are the non-voters, the people who have never voted in their life, a lot of people who have never even been registered to vote. Those are the people that we need to turn out. Those are the people that the progressive candidates have focused on when a lot of the, more moderate centrist candidates, whoever that you may think they are, regardless of that, that's who focused on them.
Sure.
I don't hear candidates like, Vice President Joe Biden. I don't hear candidates like that talking about the non-voters. And to me, especially when I was running, when I was out knocking doors, I'd find people in a household who maybe it was the children or a spouse of somebody who was on my walk list, right, who wasn't voted, who wasn't on my list because they have never registered to vote. They just never saw a candidate on their ballot that they thought deserved them to go out of their way on Election Day and vote. And I think that's so important to notice with people like Representative Summer Lee, Representative Sarah Innamorato, even myself, that was something that we focused on. People who never had a real ass person running for office in their district that they could get behind and vote for.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what it's all about. Those are the real swing voters. And if we want to take the White House in 2020, if we want to flip the 9 seats that we need in the state House in 2020, if we want to flip the 4 seats in the state Senate that we need in 2020 to take back Pennsylvania and to take back our country, that's who we need to be focusing on. Those are the people that can win these seats for us.
Sure.
So why are we neglecting them in trying to cater to centrist and to moderate Republicans? Because to me, that's not what it's all about. And we tried that in 2016 and it didn't work.
Right. And you're
so
right,
let's
Bethany.
try a different process.
And you're right, because that's what the Republicans are doing in rural counties and collar counties. They are registering in droves, and they are killing us. So to your point, absolutely. Now, I will say this. One of the things, as somebody who worked a little bit with Sarah Innamorato on building her labor street cred after she won and, getting her connected, she was really good at going in those rooms and sticking to her principles and saying, look, I don't agree with you on everything, but let's talk about some things because I think there's some things that we can work on. And she really got a lot of those people to say, hey, you know what? Nobody agrees with us 100% of the time, and that's okay if we know we can talk to her and be reasonable. And I think that what's happened with this whole dynamic with Summer is Sarah is getting categorized as, well, she got it because she was white. And it's trivializing the unbelievable amount of work that she did, that I know she did to earn that labor council endorsement. That was not handed to her. She had a lot to prove after that race because her and Summer were under the same auspice, but she worked her ass off to prove that she was going to be a legislator. And I don't know what Summer's relationship was. I know some of the things that happened. But I don't want to trivialize Sarah.
I agree.
And I that's one thing that I keep seeing.
That's my ride or die. You know that.
And I keep seeing people say, well, she got this endorsement because of the color of her skin. And I'm like, no, man, you have no idea how hard that woman worked. The conversations that she went into tough rooms. She had tough conversations and she stood her ground on what she believed in. But she also said, but hey, there's some good stuff I think we can work on. Let's do that. And she deserves credit for that.
Right. And I saw people on endorsement day who, were wearing Summer's opponent's button on endorsement day and who came up to Summer and she's like, what's up? Like, why aren't you supporting me? And they said, well, I agree with you on 99% of everything you stand for. Yeah. It's that 1% that I disagree with you on. Exactly. So you agree with a candidate on 99% of what she stands for, yet you're going to support her opponent because of that 1% of things that you disagree on? That to me is disgusting. We should not be, nobody should be a single issue voter. And I realize that a lot of people are, but in reality, if we are to sustain the Democratic Party and if we are to be a force that, remember, our goal is to beat Republicans. If we are to do that, we need to realize that no candidate is perfect. We are never going to, I would argue I was the perfect candidate, but you know what I mean? Like, no candidate is.
Of course you were.
You would argue against that.
You would argue against that, at least to my face. But you know what I mean? Like, no candidate is perfect. So when we're holding certain elected officials to standards that we're maybe not holding other elected officials to, that is, to me, where the bigger problem lies.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think that very interesting that you said, Erin, people were saying about Sarah getting that endorsement because she's white, and I think that we also have to look at the fact that these two things are unrelated, but when you look at Summer's situation, I think that when you look at the only incumbent who didn't get the endorsement is a black woman.
Yeah,
we
it's a
have
narrative
to,
that writes
yeah,
itself.
We have to have
it's
that.
a badass optic.
Yes,
it is,
it is.
And nobody disagrees with that.
Right, and beyond
it's a bad optic.
Beyond optic, I think, and again, as a white man, I'm not going to sit here and
Sure,
because that's not my place. Although I know what I see, and I also, as a white male who's been around other white men, there's no question in my mind that those things, unfortunately, do play a part, and I don't think that they would have come for her if she, number one, if she wasn't a woman, and number two, if she wasn't a black woman. Yes, she's on the environment. Rich Fitzgerald and others disagree with her, but I have a hard time reconciling that being an African American woman didn't play some part.
Oh, and I'm not saying it doesn't play into it.
Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the two of them constantly get lumped in.
Yes.
And I don't think that's fair. They're two very individuals.
That's
They're
exactly
not
right.
Everybody is their own individual person. Yes.
And they should be taken as two different. And
They
that's
should.
Not fair to either of them to
No,
put
it's
them
not.
under the same umbrella.
No, it's not. They're their own women. They stand for their own things, and there's a lot of similarities. But they as legislators, they're very different. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah.
They handled that job different.
Absolutely. So we are wrapping up here on a Super Tuesday. We are.
Super Tuesday.
Just kind of an overview. I'm so glad you stopped by, Bethany Helm. I always love it when you
I didn't know I was going to be on. I thought I was just chilling and watching you guys.
No,
on
we
here.
had a
This
whole-
is great.
oh,
I
come
love
on.
this.
Ready.
This is great. I'm having fun.
And when you come on the air here, there's surprises around every corner. And
You don't say.
I love you, Bethany Hallam. Erin McClelland, thank you so much for coming with me.
Always
we'll
a
be
pleasure.
back on April 28th.
Can we say happy birthday to Jake?
Yes,
Happy
happy
birthday,
to super producer Jake Mislivchik. And be honest, again, I said this before, none of this would exist without Jake. And
You can say that
my
again.
partner Bethany Rue and I, the other Bethany, we're not sure which is good Bethany, which is bad Bethany.
No, we're actually actively debating that tonight
Are
as
you?
well. Yes.
Good or bad
Yeah,
Bethany?
we're trying to decide.
We'll figure that out on Between Two Bethanies next
Between
week.
Two Bethanies. Yes, it's our new podcast here at the Pittsburgh Current. Anyway, Jake, not only happy birthday, but thanks for everything you do for putting this all together, for being a
Exotic
A
producer.
super
a colossal
Tuesday
pain in my
birthday
ass
boy.
with your charts and whatnot, but you do a great job, man. So, Super Tuesday live with the Pittsburgh Current is in the books, and we will see you on election night, April 28th.